Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the VTC meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Libya. The agenda is adopted. I wish to warmly welcome the Secretary-General, the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Algeria, Chad, Congo, Egypt, Greece, Italy, Libya, Morocco, the Netherlands, the Sudan, Switzerland, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the African Union, the European Union, and the League of Arab States to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to the Secretary-General, His Excellency, Mr. António Guterres.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Minister Mas, let me begin by thanking you and the German Presidency for the opportunity to update the Council on the situation in Libya in this expanded format. This important meeting, 6 months after the Berlin International Conference on Libya, brings together Security Council members with the Berlin process participants and offers an opportunity to recommit to the principles agreed in Berlin and enshrined in Security Council Resolution 2510. Excellencies, time is not on our side in Libya. The conflict has entered a new phase, with foreign interference reaching unprecedented levels, including in the delivery of sophisticated equipment and the number of mercenaries involved in the fighting. Since my acting special representative last updated the Security Council on the 19th of May, we have witnessed the retreat of the Libyan National Army's front lines in Tripoli, the takeover by Government of National Accord of Al-Wutiya Air Base, Taruna and Bani Walid, and GNA units with significant external support continued their advance eastwards and are now 25 kilometers west of Sirte after 2 previous attempts to gain control of the city. The situation on the front lines has been mostly quiet since 10 June. However, we are very concerned about the alarming military build-up around the city and the high level of direct foreign interference in the conflict in violation of the UN's arms embargo, UN Security Council resolution, and the commitments made by member states in Berlin. In addition, on Sunday, 5 July, unidentified Air Force planes launched an attack on Al-Wutiya Air Base. In this gloomy context, all opportunities to unblock the political stalemate must be seized. De-escalation efforts, including the creation of a possible demilitarized zone, are being undertaken by UNSMIL to reach a negotiated solution and spare lives. The political situation in eastern Libya has registered some movements indicating renewed support for a political solution to the conflict, as seen in the 23 May initiative by the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the 6 June Cairo Declaration. The GNA has also been calling for national elections as a solution to the crisis. Yet these openings are fragile given the parties' positions continue to be determined by military developments and support from external backers. Similarly, recent developments on the ground have yielded both parties' agreement to reconvene the 5+5 Joint Military Commission to continue discussions on the draft ceasefire agreement tabled by UNSMIL in Geneva in February. During this third round of talks, which resumed in June, my acting special representative has convened 2 virtual meetings with each delegation, which reconfirm the practical key points of a possible consensus. The current discussions focus on areas of convergence, including the departure of foreign mercenaries, solid counter-terrorism cooperation between military and security institutions across the country, disarmament and demobilization of armed groups throughout Libya, and modalities for a possible ceasefire mechanism that would reflect the new reality on the ground. The United Nations will continue working with the parties to reach a ceasefire and resume a political process. In recent days, through a telephone conversation I initiated with Prime Minister Sarraj and the call I received from Field Marshal Haftar, I made a strong appeal for both to engage fully in ensuring an effective ceasefire and move swiftly in advancing the political process. The United Nations, the African Union and the League of Arab States, together with other key regional actors and organizations, and the European Union, will continue to work closely together to support the people of Libya as they seek to consolidate their economic, security and political future. I urge your collective support. With respect to the Berlin process, 3 meetings of the plenary of the International Follow-up Committee have taken place this year on 2 April, 13 May and 22 June.
You are the only participant.
The next meeting is scheduled for this month. The political, security and economic working groups are all operational and are contributing to UNMIL's ongoing efforts for a facilitation of the Libyan-led and Libyan-owned dialogue. Excellencies, as a result of the latest military activities in southern Tripoli and Taruna, almost 30,000 people were forced to flee their homes, bringing the number of internally displaced people in Libya to over 400,000. When LNA forces and associated mercenaries withdrew from Tripoli's southern suburbs, they are reported to have planned improvised explosive devices and landmines, which have injured and killed civilians seeking to return to their homes, as well as humanitarian NGO personnel tasked with clearing these deadly devices. The United Nations is supporting national authorities in risk education and awareness campaigns. Excellencies, between 1 April and 30 June, UNSMIL documented at least 356 civilian casualties, including 102 civilian deaths and 254 civilian injuries. This is a 172% increase compared to the first quarter of 2020. Since the beginning of the organization, the World Health Organization has documented at least 21 attacks on medical facilities, ambulances, and medical personnel. As battle lines move to central Libya, acts of retaliation have grown. Social media has been used to incite hatred and violence, further fraying an already fragile social fabric. After the GNA retook control of Taruna, numerous mass graves were discovered. I was shocked by this horror and remind once again all parties to the conflict in Libya of their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. I welcome the decision by the Human Rights Council to establish an international fact-finding mission to Libya to look into human rights violations since the beginning of 2016 and promote accountability. I also note that the International Criminal Court announced that it would not hesitate to investigate possible war crimes and crimes against humanity. On 19 June, the United Nations responded to the written request from Prime Minister Sarraj to support the investigation into the mass graves. The UN stands ready to advise on the conduct of investigations, the securing of mass graves, and national mechanisms to assist victims. Excellencies, a year ago last week, on 2 July, an airstrike on the Tajura detention center killed at least 52 migrants and injured 87 others. Since then, migrants and asylum seekers in Libya continue to be routinely subjected to arbitrary detention, torture, sexual violence, abduction for ransom, forced labor, and unlawful killings. I'm also deeply concerned about the risks faced by migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers who continue to attempt to cross the Mediterranean. In 2020, more than 5,000 refugees and migrants have been intercepted or rescued at sea and returned to Libya. Many of those intercepted have been detained, with an estimated 2,500 migrants and refugees remaining in official detention centers, in some circumstances in appalling conditions. Authorities must urgently strengthen efforts towards finding alternatives to detention in Libya and more sustainable solutions for vulnerable migrants and refugees. Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic is a cause of growing concern in Libya. In the months of June alone, confirmed cases grew by sevenfold. This has brought the total to 1,046 confirmed cases and 32 deaths. Amid acute shortages of testing kits, the true scale of the pandemic in Libya is likely to be much higher. I strongly encourage the Libyan authorities to endorse a comprehensive national preparedness and response plan, which is a critical step to ensuring a coherent and coordinated approach to combating the pandemic. Adequate resources must be made available to strengthen the country's capacity to test, trace, isolate, and treat people. Excellencies, as tensions simmer in central Libya, the United Nations has continued to engage with the parties to prevent the conflict from spreading to Libya Oil Crescent region, from which the country derives 60% of the oil resources. The current blockade has already cost over $6 billion in lost revenues, damaged oil infrastructure, and creating the conditions for an historically high-level deficit of over 50% of Libya's GDP. With the support of member states, the mission is undertaking mediation aiming at lifting the oil blockage in place since January 2020 in order to spare this vitally important area from the full spectre of armed conflict and to alleviate economic hardship compounded by the conflict and COVID-19. 2 days ago, the Economic Working Group, comprising the Berlin Conference participants, held a virtual meeting with the chairman of the National Oil Corporation and issued a joint statement supporting the National Oil Corporation as it resumes the production across Libya. The National Oil Corporation has declared today its intention to lift force majeure on the eastern port of El Sidar to allow a tanker to unload crude oil now in storage. It has further called for the immediate departure of all armed groups from the Libyan oil facilities. I am confident that the Council will continue to support efforts aimed at lifting the oil blockage for the benefit of the Libyan people. Excellencies, in order to improve the transparent allocation of the country's abundant resources, UNSMIL has worked tirelessly towards conducting an international audit of the two branches of the Central Bank of Libya. Unfortunately, this audit has not achieved the envisaged progress due to obstructions by several key national officers. This is occurring despite Libya's own judicial authorities having deemed the audit legal in June of this year. I call on the Security Council to make full use of the necessary measures to ensure that this essential exercise is initiated as soon as possible. Mr. President, UNSMIL remains on the ground in Libya despite the difficult circumstances. The designation of a new special representative will greatly facilitate the mission's efforts, and I count on the Security Council in expediting the process. On 10 August, we will mark the one-year anniversary of the attack in Benghazi that killed 3 of our dear colleagues, Hussein al-Hadar, Clive Pick, and Seniloli Tebs, Tabwa Tausole, and injured 2 others. The perpetrators of such attack have yet to be identified, but this tragedy will not discourage the UN from delivering on its mandate to bring peace, stability and prosperity to Libya and its people. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary-General for his briefing. We understand he has to leave around 12 noon due to another engagement, but want to thank the Secretary-General again for his participation in today's meeting. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 to a maximum of 5 minutes, please. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany. Mr. Secretary-General, colleagues, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 6 months have passed since the Berlin Conference on Libya. In those 6 months, COVID-19 has turned the world upside down. While doctors and patients on all continents were fighting to save human lives, hospitals in Libya were being bombed. While the whole world closed its borders and went into a lockdown, ships, planes, and trucks with weapons and mercenaries kept arriving in Libyan cities. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to stop this cynical absurdity. This is why we decided to invite all of you and all of the participants of the Berlin process here today to discuss and agree on the next steps. First, foreign interference remains the main driver of the conflict in Libya. It must be brought to an end. That means no more planes, no more tanks, no more trucks or cargo ships full of weapons, and no more lies. We will use the measures at our disposal, including targeted sanctions, to make sure that Libya is no longer the battleground in a foreign war. Second, backdoor deals through which foreign actors carve out spheres of influence must stop. Instead, we must unite behind UNSMIL and the peace efforts led by the United Nations to help the Libyan people find a political solution, to achieve lasting peace, and to preserve Libya's territorial integrity and sovereignty. And third, the current calm on Libya's battlefields is more than fragile. Our duty is to translate it into a negotiated ceasefire now within the framework of the United Nations 5+5 talks. We call on the conflict parties to bring these negotiations to a successful conclusion without preconditions and without further delay. A first important step could be a demilitarized solution for Sirte and Jafra. We call on the parties in Libya and on all of you to unite behind this idea, and we encourage the Secretariat to provide us with options on how this could be implemented on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 months ago, this Council endorsed the conclusions of the Berlin Conference in Resolution 2510. A week ago, we backed the Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire during the pandemic in Resolution 2532. Today, the time has come to put our words in action. Thank you very much. I resume my function as President of the Council now. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kalla Ankurao, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Niger. Sorry, Your Excellency, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you. Excellency Mr. Wang Yi, the State Councillor and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China.
Mr. President, colleagues, I appreciate Germany's initiative of holding a Security Council session on Libya and welcome Foreign Minister Mas as the chair of the session. The Libyan crisis has persisted for a decade, claiming tens of thousands of lives and displacing 400,000 people. It has brought untold suffering to the Libyan people, plunged the region into turmoil, and undermined international peace and security. Even as we speak, the armed conflict in Libya continues unabated, opening the door to rampant terrorism, weapons proliferation, and massive refugee outflows. The Berlin Conference held last January reaffirmed the consensus of the international community, but its implementation is fraught with setbacks and challenges. It is imperative that we work to translate consensus into action, turn vision into reality on the ground, and bring peace to the Libyan people as soon as possible. The Security Council has a particular duty to make that happen. I thank the Secretary-General for the informative briefing, and I also agree with Foreign Minister Mas on behalf of Germany. Let me share the following four thoughts with you. First, achieving a comprehensive ceasefire and cessation of violence should be our immediate priority. We call on all parties in Libya to heed the call of Secretary-General Guterres for a global ceasefire, immediately pull back from hostilities, and restart the 5+5 Joint Military Commission to de-escalate the conflict and bring about lasting ceasefire. We urge all countries to honor Security Council resolutions, not to involve themselves in the armed conflict or meddle in Libya's internal affairs, and strictly enforce Security Council provisions on arms embargo. Second, striving for political settlement is the only way forward. UNSCR 2510 endorses the communique of the Berlin Conference and sends a message of supporting a political settlement. We call on all parties in Libya to return to dialogue and pursue political, economic, and military negotiations in parallel. The principle of a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned process must be upheld by all, and the role of the United Nations must be supported as the main channel of mediation. Regional organizations such as the Arab League and the African Union have unique resources for facilitating a political solution. They should be encouraged to play an important role. Third, removing the spillovers of the crisis is key. The international community must firmly reject terrorism in all its manifestations. In particular, it is imperative to forestall the cross-border movement of foreign terrorists, fight the terrorist organizations and individuals listed by the Security Council, and prevent Libya from becoming a hotbed for terrorism. We understand the pressure faced by some countries from the inflow of refugees and commend their efforts to accommodate them. Yet the fundamental solution lies in ending the Libyan crisis and beginning reconstruction in the country. Fourth, the purposes and principles of the UN Charter must be adhered to. What we can learn from the decade-long turmoil in Libya is that attempts aimed at so-called regime change only spark turbulence, and that military intervention only opens the door to endless trouble. As we mark the 75th anniversary of the founding of the UN this year, we have a unique opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to the UN Charter and the principle of non-interference, to the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to the peaceful settlement of international disputes. Commitment to these fundamental principles serves as major precondition for the Security Council to perform its duties and responsibilities effectively. It also provides a strong guarantee for upholding international peace and security. Mr. President, colleagues, China's position on the Libyan situation has been consistent, objective, and impartial. Respect Libya's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and we support a political settlement under the auspices of the UN. China will continue to work with the parties to hasten the day when the Libyan people will embrace the peace and development that they so richly deserve. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Wang for his statement. And now back to Niger. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kala Ankurao, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Niger. Please. Sorry, Excellency, we still can't hear you. Your Excellency, we still can't hear you. And perhaps you can solve the technical problem, and I would propose that we come back to you later on. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Noureddin Aray, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. معالي السيد وزير خارجية جمهورية ألمانيا الاتحادية رئيس مجلس الأمن، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، السيدات والسادة، يطيب لي في البداية أن أتوجه بجزيل الشكر إلى السيد هيكو ماس وزير خارجية ألمانيا الاتحادية الصديقة على المبادرة الهامة بالدعوة إلى عقد جلسة على المستوى الوزاري لمجلس الأمن حول تطور الأوضاع في ليبيا، والتي نأمل أن تحمل رسائل طمأنة إلى الشعب الليبي الشقيق حول الالتزام الثابت والقوي لمجلس الأمن والمجتمع الدولي عموما بدفع جميع الأطراف إلى تجاوز الأزمة الراهنة ووضع حد للصراع وتحقيق تسوية سياسية شاملة. كما لا يفوتني أن أتوجه بفائق التقدير إلى السيد الأمين العام لمنظمة الأمم المتحدة أنطونيو غوتيريس، ومن خلاله إلى كل القائمين على تنفيذ ولاية بعثة الأمم المتحدة للدعم في ليبيا برئاسة السيدة ستيفاني ويليامز لما يبذلونه من جهود قيمة ومتواصلة من أجل حل الأزمة في ليبيا، وهي أيضا مناسبة ليؤكد مجددا حرص تونس الراسخ على تقديم كل التسهيلات والمساعدات حتى تؤدي البعثة الأممية في ليبيا مهامها النبيلة في أحسن الظروف. السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، إن في استمرار التصعيد وتعطل المسار السياسي في ليبيا تهديد مباشر للسلم والأمن في المنطقة والعالم، وهو يطرح كذلك تحدي حقيقي يتطلب منا تضافر كل الجهود الخيرة والمبادرات القابلة للتنفيذ من أجل التوصل إلى حل دائم وشامل للأزمة في هذا البلد الشقيق برعاية الأمم المتحدة ووفقا للأطر المتفق عليها ليبيا ودوليا. ولقد كانت تونس سباقة في التحذير منذ اندلاع الأزمة من مخاطر الانزلاقات الأمنية، وخاصة من مغبة تجديد الصراع وإطالة أمده عبر التدخلات الخارجية. حرصت في كل المناسبات على التأكيد على موقفها الثابت بأهمية اعتماد حل سياسي ليبي تحت سقف الشرعية الدولية وفقا لآليات الحوار الواردة في الاتفاق السياسي، مثل ما تضمنته كافة قرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة. وإذ تذكر تونس بالدور الإيجابي والحيادي الذي التزمت به تجاه الأزمة في ليبيا انطلاقا من واجب الجيرة والتاريخ المشترك، فإنها تؤكد مرة أخرى على انفتاحها على أي حوار ليبي شامل في إطار مرجعيات الشرعية الدولية وتحت رعاية الأمم المتحدة واستعدادها لدعمه ومرافقته. وفي هذا السياق ترحب بتونس بالتقدم الحاصل في تنفيذ مخرجات مؤتمر برلين برعاية الأمم المتحدة، وتعرب عن أملها في تحقيق التقدم المنشود لاستئناف مسار العملية السياسية بمشاركة كافة الأطراف الليبية في أقرب الأجال. كما تشيد بلادي بالدور الهام الذي تقوم به بعثة الأمم المتحدة للدعم في ليبيا، وتدعو إلى التعجيل بتعيين مبعوث أممي جديد إلى ليبيا. وانطلاقا من إدراكها للتداعيات الخطيرة للأزمة على الأوضاع الإنسانية والاجتماعية للشعب الليبي الشقيق، تعلن تونس انضمامها إلى فريق العمل الإنساني المنبثق عن مؤتمر برلين، وتؤكد على ضرورة احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان في ليبيا، وهي تهيب بالأطراف بالالتزام بضمان سلامة المدنيين خاصة منهم النساء والأطفال، وتدعو إلى معالجة الأوضاع المهاجرين. السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، مثلت جائحة كوفيد-19 تحديا جديدا ضاعف من معاناة الشعب الليبي الشقيق، ولقد كان سيادة الرئيس قيس سعيد من أوائل القادة في العالم الداعين إلى إقرار هدنة إنسانية عاجلة وصياغة رؤى جديدة تقوم على قيم التضامن والتآزر وتسهم في تكريس السلم والأمن الدوليين وتتيح المجال للتعامل السريع مع الأزمات والجوائح غير المسبوقة والتهديدات المستجدة للأمن والسلم الدوليين، التي أثبتت الأحداث بأنه لا يمكن لأي دولة إدارتها والتوقي منها والحد من انتشارها بشكل منفرد على غرار جائحة كوفيد-19. وفي هذا السياق تود بلادي الأعراب عن بالغ شكرها وفائق امتنانها لكافة أعضاء مجلس الأمن لما أبدوه من تعاون بناء أفضى لاعتماد المجلس بالإجماع للقرار رقم 2532 وتهيب تونس بكافة الأطراف المعنية بالأزمة في ليبيا للالتزام التام بما ورد في هذا القرار من مضامين عميقة ومهمة. السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، إن الترتيب البيت الداخلي وتعزيز الوحدة الوطنية وتحقيق المصالحة الشاملة سيمكن الليبيين من تولي أمورهم بأنفسهم للتوصل إلى التسوية السياسية عن طريق الحوار برعاية الأمم المتحدة ووفقا للقرارات الشرعية الدولية، كما أن المبادرات والجهود الدولية والإقليمية لا يمكن أن تنجح في مساعدة الليبيين على التوجه نحو الحل السياسي ما دامت الخلافات والصراعات تفرقهم والثقة غائبة بينهم. ولا نزال في تونس واثقين في قدرة الأشقاء الليبيين على تجاوز الأزمة إذا ما توفرت الرؤية الواضحة والإرادة السياسية، وإذا ما تم الاحتكام إلى الحوار الوطني السلمي الجامع الذي لا بديل عنه للتقدم نحو الأمن والسلام، استنادا إلى الاتفاق السياسي الليبي وقرارات الشرعية الدولية ذات الصلة. وفي الختام تجدد تونس استعدادها التام لمواصلة جهودها بنفس الإرادة والعزيمة للمساهمة الفاعلة في تخفيف المعاناة الإنسانية عن الشعب الليبي الشقيق، والاطلاع بدور بناء في دعم كافة الجهود الدولية والإقليمية الرامية لاستئناف الحوار بين كل الأطراف الليبية المعنية. شكرا على حسن الإصغاء، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Irai for his statement. And now I give the floor to Her Excellency Dr. Naledi Pandor, Minister for International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for convening this meeting today on the situation in Libya. The high-level participation reflects the gravity of the matter that we're discussing. We wish to thank the Secretary-General for his briefing, which clearly indicated the distressing security and humanitarian situation in Libya and the repercussions that this may pose for peace and security in the region, as well as in various parts of the African continent. The increased military buildup, intensified with foreign intervention, which we've witnessed in the past 14 months, coupled with ongoing hostilities, has had a devastating impact on the day-to-day lives of Libyans. And this has been made worse by the advent of COVID-19. All of this has resulted in the loss of lives and injuries to innocent civilians, in particular to women and children. The recent discovery of mass graves in and around Taruna provides evidence of the nature of the atrocities being committed. We welcome the decision that there should be an investigation into these atrocities, and we sincerely hope that those responsible will be held accountable. Mr. President, South Africa urges the parties to the conflict in Libya to heed the call of the Secretary-General and the African Union and to urgently agree to a ceasefire to be implemented with immediate effect. Furthermore, we call on all Libyan parties, community leaders, and non-governmental organizations to commit to a constructive political dialogue and to work towards a sustainable and lasting political agreement. We reiterate our view that lasting peace and stability in Libya can only come through a political solution designed and owned by Libyans for Libyans. To this end, South Africa welcomes the African Union's decision to convene an inter-Libyan reconciliation conference in Addis Ababa later this year, COVID-19 permitting. In the build-up to this conference, we appeal to all participants in today's meeting to support this initiative. Through continued cooperation and collaboration, we believe we can all work collectively toward a lasting political solution and a reconciliation process which will ensure lasting peace. Our country, South Africa, and the chairperson of the African Union, President Ramaphosa, supports the ongoing efforts of the African Union through its Peace and Security Council and the High-Level Committee on Libya, and through the contact group, as well as the work of the African Union Special Envoy on Libya, as all of them continue to engage with the main stakeholders in that country. It is vital that we synthesize all these efforts, particularly those of the African Union and the United Nations, in order to ensure that we work with common purpose to end the conflict in Libya. Mr. President, under no circumstances should there be a military solution to the conflict in Libya. This has to be avoided at all costs. In seeking a peaceful solution, we repeat South Africa and the African Union's support for the conclusions of the Berlin Conference. However, we note with mounting concern that several of the commitments agreed to 6 months ago in Berlin have neither been respected nor implemented. We should recall that at the Berlin Conference, there was a commitment by international partners to respect the embargo on arms and to refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of Libya. However, as you yourself have said, Mr. President, persistent violations of the arms embargo continue by both the parties as well as by external players, with the entry of weapons and foreign fighters into Libya. South Africa wishes to affirm the African Union's strong condemnation of all forms of violations of the UN arms embargo by whoever this is committed. In this regard, the African Union has called on the United Nations through its Security Council to fully assume its responsibility to ensure that the embargo is effectively implemented and monitored as part of the efforts to end fighting and create the necessary conditions for a permanent ceasefire. In conclusion, Mr. President, allow me to reiterate that there can be no military solution to the conflict in Libya, and that the continued political meddling and military interference by external actors in the affairs of Libya has to come to an end. These actions undermine the fundamental interests and rights of the Libyan people and detract from building national unity amongst Libyans. We reaffirm our commitment to the unity and territorial integrity of Libya and the preservation and use of its natural resources for the sole benefit of the people of Libya. And we hope that this meeting will lead to greater success in terms of the agreements of the Berlin Conference. I thank you, Honorable President.
I thank Her Excellency Dr. Naledi Pandor for her statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. James Cleverly, Minister of State for the Middle East and North Africa of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Mr. President, firstly, may I thank the Secretary-General for his briefing and to the Acting Special Representative and her team for the continued and tireless efforts of all those working in the mission to end the conflict in Libya. Let me also thank you, Mr. President, for chairing this time session. 6 months ago, the Berlin Conference participants, represented here today, committed unequivocally and fully to respect and implement the UN embargo and called on all actors to refrain from activities exacerbating the conflict, including the financing of military capabilities and the recruitment of mercenaries. But 6 months later, Mr. President, it is clear, sadly, that some of those same countries have continued to arm and supply their proxies in flagrant violation of the arms embargo. We condemn this disregard for the commitments made in Berlin. We also condemn the disregard for the resolutions of this Council, and we condemn the disregard for their obligations under international law. The UK is deeply concerned at the ongoing conflict, fueled by the reckless international interventions and the unacceptable humanitarian and human rights cost, all at the time of a worsening coronavirus outbreak. Continued reports of numerous civilian casualties cannot be acceptable. It is shocking that the World Health Organization ranked Libya first in the world, ahead of Afghanistan and Syria in the numbers of attacks on health facilities and staff from January to May 2020. The UK is particularly concerned about the unacceptable civilian and mine clearance personnel casualties as a result of mines, booby traps, and improvised explosive devices left by the withdrawing forces aligned with the LNA. The UK continues to fund specialist NGOs to map explosive hazards, share expertise, and the mine action community, and conduct demining on the ground. We are shocked by the disturbing reports of the discovery of mass graves in Tahuna. The Libyan authorities must secure these sites until proper investigations can be conducted. We condemn all human rights violations and abuses and violations of international humanitarian law, including indiscriminate attacks, unlawful killings, sexual and gender-based violence, and the silencing of journalists and human rights defenders. The persistent climate of impunity in Libya must be addressed. This is why the UK co-sponsored the resolution adopted by the Human Rights Council's 43rd session, establishing an international, independent, fact-finding mission to investigate violations and abuses in Libya. We call on all parties to allow access to the mission across the whole country. In the economic sphere, the independent audit and the two central bank branches, a vital step towards improved transparency and reunification. We encourage all parties to cooperate fully with this process. We continue to condemn unequivocally the blockade of oil facilities and welcome the UN-led efforts to end the blockade. Libya's legitimate national oil corporation should be allowed to operate unimpeded for the benefit of all Libyans. We are particularly concerned at reports of the Wagner Group and other foreign mercenaries entering Libyan oil fields. Wagner Group activities exacerbate the conflict, as does all external military support, including the provision of mercenaries and arms and deployment of combat aircraft. But what have external backers for the parties gained, Mr. President, from their continued disregard of the commitments they made in Berlin? Despite the rapid developments on the ground, it is clearer now than ever that there can be no military solution. Only a political process will be able to provide a sustainable, inclusive settlement for the people of Libya. Now, despite all this, there is now a window of opportunity to make real progress and change Libya's troubled trajectory. We welcome the engagement in the UN-led 5+5 military talks, which we are supporting as co-chairs of the Security Working Group. This is especially important now that the high risk of further escalation around Sirte. Only by engaging in the 5+5 dialogue in good faith can the parties avoid further bloodshed and put Libya back on a road to political agreement. We fully support UNSMIL's efforts to de-escalate the situation around Sirte. Instead of emphasizing maximalist goals and red lines, the parties should engage constructively in the military talks to agree a viable ceasefire. And instead of further fueling the conflict, the international backers must recognize that their interests lie in meeting their Berlin commitments and supporting the parties to achieve a ceasefire, a return to a UN-led political process, an inclusive political solution for all of Libya. Thank you, sir.
Thank His Excellency, Mr. Cleverly, for his statement. And now back to Niger. Again, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais encore tenter une fois, ça va? Est-ce qu'on m'entend maintenant? Très bien. Monsieur le Président du Conseil, que la question libyenne soit examinée au tout début de votre présidence du Conseil est la preuve éloquente, s'il en était besoin, de l'attachement de votre pays à la recherche d'une solution politique à la crise multiforme que connaît ce pays. Ainsi, c'est au nom de l'objectif central que s'est assigné l'Allemagne d'arrêter le conflit en Libye que la chancelière Angela Merkel a, plusieurs mois durant, sacrifié tant d'énergie pour organiser le grand rendez-vous de Berlin du 9 janvier 2020. Je voudrais féliciter la chancelière pour avoir entrepris des efforts considérables à cet égard et pour avoir regroupé autour d'elle des représentants des pays et organisations, tous aussi intéressés à la recherche d'une solution à cette crise libyenne. Je voudrais remercier le secrétaire général, M. António Guterres, pour l'exposé qu'il vient de nous faire et pour son engagement continu pour la recherche d'une formule politique de sortie des crises en Libye. J'associe à ces remerciements Mme Stephanie Williams, représentante spéciale par intérim du secrétaire général, pour le travail qu'elle accomplit dans un contexte particulièrement difficile. La présence de plusieurs ministres à la session d'aujourd'hui est la preuve de l'intérêt que la communauté internationale accorde à la résolution de cette crise. Monsieur le Président, 6 mois après la rencontre de Berlin, quoi de plus normal que la tenue de cette réunion du Conseil de sécurité, qui du reste a validé les conclusions de cette importante rencontre pour évaluer aujourd'hui le chemin parcouru depuis lors. En effet, Berlin aura été sans conteste ce rendez-vous où un certain nombre de principes cardinaux ont été posés, notamment la réaffirmation de la souveraineté, de l'indépendance et de l'intégrité territoriale de la Libye, l'arrêt de l'appui militaire aux belligérants, la lutte contre les groupes terroristes, le retour à un processus politique interlibyen, le respect de l'embargo sur les armes, le respect des droits humanitaires et des droits de l'homme, la répartition des revenus du pétrole, etc. 6 mois après le rendez-vous de Berlin, nous sommes au regret de constater que la situation en Libye s'est dégradée, au lieu de connaître l'amélioration que nous étions légitimement en droit d'attendre, compte tenu notamment des engagements pris par les différents participants à cette conférence et leur validation par le Conseil de sécurité. Le respect de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité territoriale continue d'être mis à rude épreuve par les ingérences extérieures qui alimentent les tensions entre les parties belligérantes et compromettent gravement les efforts de la communauté internationale en faveur d'un retour à un processus politique porté par les Libyens eux-mêmes. Ces ingérences, dont on sait aujourd'hui qu'elles s'accompagnent de transferts massifs d'armes de guerre et de mercenaires, constituent une violation flagrante des résolutions 1970 de 2011 et 2292 de 2016 du Conseil de sécurité, en même temps qu'elle favorise le développement des groupes terroristes sous la protection de certains belligérants. Pour mon pays, le Niger, ainsi que pour les autres pays voisins de la Libye, une telle situation qui menace directement notre sécurité et qui a un impact direct sur la situation à laquelle ils sont confrontés et dont les effets néfastes se traduisent par les attaques terroristes au Sahel et dans la région du bassin du lac Tchad. Monsieur le Président, on ne le dira jamais assez. La Libye n'a pas besoin davantage d'armes qu'elle en a. Elle n'a pas besoin de mercenaires. Elle n'a pas non plus besoin d'être le théâtre de l'expression de la volonté de puissance de certains acteurs internationaux. Elle a aujourd'hui besoin de réconciliation, de paix et de prospérité, tout comme ses voisins qui ont plus que jamais besoin de paix et de sécurité. C'est le lieu pour ma délégation de réitérer l'importance du rôle que doit continuer de jouer le Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies, l'Union africaine, la Ligue des États arabes, l'Union européenne et tous les autres acteurs concernés pour stopper la dérive actuelle et aider la Libye à redevenir ce pays de paix, de stabilité et de prospérité. C'est également le lieu ici de rappeler l'urgence de la nomination d'un représentant spécial du secrétaire général qui, de concert avec le comité spécial de haut niveau de l'Union africaine sur la Libye, pourra relancer la dynamique de paix et de réconciliation que j'évoquais tantôt. Il appartient désormais au Conseil d'agir en vue de remplir cette vacance qui n'a que trop duré. Dans le même cadre, le Niger exprime le souhait de voir se tenir très prochainement la conférence de réconciliation interlibyenne sous l'égide de l'Union africaine. En effet, nous demeurons convaincus qu'aucune solution politique à la crise libyenne ne pourra être trouvée sans la participation pleine et entière de toutes les filles et de tous les fils de la Libye, sans exclusive aucune. Monsieur le Président, la paix définitive et durable que nous recherchons tous ne peut s'accommoder des graves violations des droits de l'homme dont sont victimes les populations libyennes, en majorité les femmes et les enfants, les migrants résidant temporairement dans ce pays. En cette période de pandémie du Covid-19, rien ne peut justifier les attaques contre les hôpitaux et les autres infrastructures civiles. Il ne s'agit ni plus ni moins que de violations flagrantes du droit international humanitaire assimilables à des crimes de guerre. Dans un tel contexte, une attention particulière doit être accordée à la situation des migrants africains se trouvant dans des camps de détention et qui, en plus d'être privés des droits élémentaires, sont souvent utilisés malgré eux comme des combattants ou des boucliers humains par les différents groupes armés. C'est le lieu pour moi de féliciter l'Union européenne pour avoir mis en place l'opération Irini, conformément à la résolution 2292 du Conseil de sécurité. C'est notre espoir que cette opération continuera à limiter le flux d'armes en Libye y compris par les frontières terrestres, en travaillant en étroite collaboration avec les Libyens eux-mêmes, les pays voisins et l'Union africaine en vue de garantir le respect de l'embargo sur les armes, la lutte contre le crime organisé et le trafic des migrants. Je voudrais engager les membres du quartet sur la Libye à travailler avec le comité international de suivi chargé de la mise en œuvre des engagements pris à Berlin pour en faciliter la mise en œuvre. Monsieur le Président, de toute évidence, toutes les conditions d'un conflit qui s'inscrit désormais dans la durée avec son lot de violences, de pertes en vies humaines et en destruction sont réunies. Les ingérences extérieures ne font qu'exacerber la crise, éloignant de la sorte la solution politique, pourtant la seule à même de permettre aux Libyens de prendre en main le destin de leur pays. C'est pourquoi nous appelons tous les participants au processus de Berlin à prendre conscience de leurs responsabilités et à honorer leurs engagements en s'abstenant d'interférer dans les affaires intérieures de la Libye et en donnant une chance à la création des conditions d'un cessez-le-feu général à même de permettre l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire devenue cruciale dans ce moment de pandémie du Covid-19 et de mettre la Libye sur une route de paix durable. Monsieur le Président, je voudrais, avant de conclure, réaffirmer que seule une action résolue du Conseil de sécurité visant à établir les responsabilités et à désigner les vrais coupables de la dégradation de la situation en Libye pourra arrêter les conséquences de l'inertie inacceptable de la communauté internationale dans ce pays. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And dear colleagues, please remember we have an extended list of speakers. So, and our next speaker is the representative of France. Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister Mas. Thank you very much. Monsieur le Président, je prononce cette intervention au nom de Monsieur Jean-Yves Le Drian, ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères. Je salue et je remercie le secrétaire général pour sa présence parmi nous et pour sa présentation. Pour la France, deux priorités s'imposent aujourd'hui en Libye. Il est tout d'abord plus que jamais urgent que les ingérences étrangères dans le conflit libyen cessent. Le risque d'escalade régionale et d'une syrianisation de la Libye est réel. Malgré l'accalmie relative et la stabilisation de la ligne de front sur l'axe Sirte-Joufra, le renforcement militaire des deux camps se poursuit de façon préoccupante. Une nouvelle dégradation sécuritaire menacerait les intérêts de la Libye et serait porteuse d'un risque de déstabilisation durable de ses voisins et de l'Europe. Elle fragiliserait également les avancées de la lutte contre le terrorisme au Sahel. Les ingérences étrangères en Libye doivent cesser et l'embargo sur les armes mis en place par ce Conseil doit être pleinement respecté. La France réitère son plein soutien à l'opération EUNAVFOR Med Irini, déployée par l'Union européenne pour assurer la mise en œuvre de l'embargo, à laquelle elle participe activement. Cette opération vise à empêcher toutes les violations de manière impartiale, quelle que soit leur origine et quel qu'en soit le bénéficiaire. C'est sur la base du mandat du Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies que l'Union européenne agit pour vérifier la mise en œuvre de l'embargo. Il est important dans ce contexte d'éviter tout risque d'incident du type de celui que nous avons récemment connu du fait de manœuvres dangereuses de la marine turque. Nous restons en effet très préoccupés par les violations répétées de l'embargo, en contradiction manifeste des engagements pris lors de la conférence de Berlin et en violation de la résolution 2510 adoptée par ce Conseil qui s'applique à tous la Turquie comme la Russie ne faisant pas exception. Deuxièmement, la fin des hostilités est essentielle pour créer les conditions nécessaires à la reprise effective du dialogue politique inter-libyen. Il y a urgence à transformer le gel des positions en une trêve solide et à progresser vers un cessez-le-feu durable et crédible dans le cadre du comité militaire 5+5, sous l'égide de la mission d'appui des Nations Unies en Libye. Cet accord doit prévoir notamment le retrait de toutes les régions de Libye, de l'ensemble des forces étrangères, des mercenaires et des équipements militaires livrés en violation des résolutions de ce Conseil, le désarmement des milices ainsi qu'un mécanisme de contrôle par les Nations Unies. Ce sont les messages que le ministre Le Drian a passés aux protagonistes libyens dans ses appels aux différentes parties la semaine passée. Il les a en particulier appelés à adopter une position de négociation équilibrée dans le cadre du comité militaire 5+5, alors que certains, en Libye et à l'extérieur, sont tentés de poursuivre l'offensive. Tous les efforts pour promouvoir une solution politique, y compris l'initiative égyptienne annoncée le 6 juin, doivent être encouragés. Toute initiative en soutien à un accord de cessez-le-feu et à un règlement politique négocié de la crise libyenne doit être pleinement inclusive et s'inscrire résolument dans le plein respect des principes de la conférence de Berlin, qui demeure le seul cadre international viable. Il est également important d'avancer dans la mise en place d'un mécanisme crédible de contrôle des revenus pétroliers libyens afin de s'assurer que ceux-ci bénéficient au peuple libyen et ne sont pas détournés au profit des milices. Nous appelons enfin le secrétaire général à nommer une nouvelle ou un nouveau représentant spécial dans les meilleurs délais. Il est grand temps que les membres de ce Conseil se montrent constructifs. Malgré les efforts et le travail remarquable de Stephanie Williams, que je salue, le vide laissé par le départ de Hassan Salamé il y a près de 5 mois ne peut qu'alimenter une dynamique délétère. Monsieur le Président, la France ne choisit pas un camp ou l'autre en Libye et a toujours dit qu'il n'y aura pas de solution militaire dans ce conflit. Avec ses partenaires de l'Union européenne, elle restera pleinement engagée et mobilisée au service du peuple libyen pour trouver une solution politique à ce conflit qui n'a que trop duré, en lien avec toutes les parties libyennes ainsi que ses partenaires de la région. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Merci beaucoup, Nicolas. And now I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Minister Moss, for chairing this session today. And thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for joining us today, along with ministers and senior officials from other delegations and regional organizations. Since this council last met to discuss Libya, we have seen dramatic shifts on both the military and health fronts. On the military battlefield, fighting has led to territorial gains for one side and losses for the other, and unfortunately, a continued influx of foreign fighters, weapons, and material for both. And on the COVID-19 battlefield, we have watched Libya struggle to contain a rising number of cases, a challenge that the conflict only exasperates. What has not changed since the last time this council met to discuss UNSMIL is the United States policy toward Libya. We continue to oppose all foreign military intervention in Libya. Finalizing an immediate ceasefire under the UN-led 5+5 ceasefire talks is key, as is compliance with the UN arms embargo by all member states, including members of this council. We urge member states to continue to share information with the Libya panel of experts of potential arms embargo violations. Success will require Libyan parties to participate in ceasefire negotiations in good faith. They must support means to verify compliance once a ceasefire is established. Ultimately, Libyan parties must resolve this crisis through UN-facilitated political negotiations with support from the international community in the Berlin process. All external actors involved in the conflict should abide by the commitments they made in Berlin and immediately suspend military operations, halt the ongoing transfer of foreign military equipment and fighters to Libya, and allow authorities to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me be clear. There is no place for foreign mercenaries or proxy forces in Libya, including, as evidence makes clear, Russian government proxies fighting alongside and in support of LNA forces. The situations in Sirte and Al-Jufra remain of grave concern, and we should not underestimate the significance of these places for the control of Libya's oil crescent. The United States is also closely monitoring the movement of Wagner mercenaries and their aligned foreign fighters from Sudan and elsewhere to southern oil facilities. We have received reports that they have installed military equipment and mines to assist their forced takeover of the sites. The examples are of continued violations of the arms embargo and clear violations of Libyan sovereignty. To achieve a peaceful outcome, there is one obvious solution. Instead of sending proxy forces and military equipment to assert control over oil facilities by force, the parties must allow the National Oil Corporation to resume its operations immediately. This Council's Resolution 2510, like past resolutions, makes clear Libya's oil resources are for the benefit of all Libyans and needs to remain under the exclusive control of the National Oil Corporation. Full stop. The Trump administration welcomes the establishment of international fact-finding mission to Libya to investigate human rights violations and abuses and violations of international humanitarian law, with a view to ensuring the perpetrators of such abuses and violations are finally held to account. A culture of impunity has gone on for far too long, as attacks on the Libyan people and civilian infrastructure continue. This has only been heightened by the recent and horrific discovery of at least 8 mass grave sites in locations vacated by the LNA. The fact-finding mission needs to investigate these findings through safe and unhindered access to Libyan territory, so they may speak freely with witnesses to hold those responsible accountable for these acts. Finally, to ensure diplomatic success over the long term, we should ensure that UNSMIL is fit for purpose. Recent events in Libya offer a new chance and a limited opening for the UN to help and achieve an enduring ceasefire. We should not squander this opportunity. It is not every day the United Nations can act with speed to respond to an evolving situation on the ground. Reforming UNSMIL now gives us the best chance to capitalize on battlefield changes in order to bring about a permanent, Libyan-led, Libyan-owned political settlement and to reinforce the commitments made by world leaders in Berlin earlier this year. In the meantime, Acting SRSG Stephanie Williams and the entire UNSMIL team deserve our unified and unwavering support. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the representative of the United States. And now I give the floor to the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you, Excellency. Foreign Minister Maz, we welcome your participation as well as that of all distinguished foreign ministers and representatives of the International Follow-up Committee on Libya and neighboring countries in today's meeting. My delegation also thanks Secretary-General Guterres for his insightful briefing. It is heart-wrenching that since 2011, Libya continues to be plagued by instability and insecurity. The protracted crisis has spiraled out of control, as is evident with recent escalation in violence. Coupled with the dismal humanitarian situation exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, Libya is clearly on a precipice. Accordingly, St. Vincent and the Grenadines strongly urges the warring parties to commit to a permanent ceasefire. We call on the international community to redouble its efforts to assist in resolving the crisis. If not, Libya may soon fall into an abyss of desolation, and the repercussions will be detrimental to all Libyans, including future generations, neighboring countries, the wider African continent, and Europe. Indeed, national reconciliation is possible within the framework of a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process under the auspices of the United Nations. We reaffirm our support for UNSMIL and renew our call for the appointment of a new SRSG. We further commend the complementary efforts of the African Union, the Arab League, and all other actors, and reiterate our support for the convening of the African Union-led Inter-Libyan Reconciliation Conference. In order for the United Nations approach to yield positive results, we must deepen our resolve and respond to Libya's complex challenges in a concerted manner. To this end, parties must comply with their international obligations, commencing with respecting the arms embargo and all relevant resolutions in Libya, as well as international humanitarian law. St. Vincent and the Grenadines reiterates its additionally, interference by international actors to advance narrow interests, undermine constructive efforts and initiatives. We urge external actors to refrain from taking actions that compromise ongoing negotiations. We also emphasize the need to respect Libya's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In the midst of existing challenges, the Libyan people, especially groups made most vulnerable, continue to be adversely affected. The incessant violence, countless deaths, and the challenges facing migrants and refugees, including torture, sexual violence, forced disappearances, trafficking, and sale of migrants, are appalling. We therefore welcome the creation of the International Fact-Finding Mission to Libya of the Human Rights Council to investigate atrocity crimes and ensure accountability. We also appeal to the Libyan authorities to facilitate safe humanitarian access. Excellencies, the exigencies of our time require us to do more for the Libyan people. We must be vigilant and consistent in addressing the current challenges, no matter their complexities, and put our efforts towards a pacific settlement to Libya's ongoing crisis. St. Vincent and the Grenadines will continue to work with the international community in finding a political solution to the crisis. We remain in solidarity with our Libyan brothers and sisters. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I give the floor to the representative of Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Secretary-General for his sobering account on how much still remains to be done at the international level to help bring peace and stability to Libya. I also thank the German presidency for organizing today's meeting that will allow us to hear from all the participants of the Berlin process and the neighboring states. Lasting peace in Libya can only come through a Libyan-owned and Libyan-led political process. We welcome the renewed engagement of both parties to the conflict in the third round of talks of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission, but clearly more progress is needed. The fighting needs to stop, and I welcome the initiatives proposed here today that aim to diffuse tensions and create space for a negotiated solution. The Berlin conference in January was an important milestone in bringing together the international community in the efforts of finding a solution to the Libyan conflict. It is truly commendable that the process has continued despite the restrictions and that currently all the working groups are actively conducting their discussions. The UN-led and facilitated international process must remain at the center of the international efforts. However, despite the advances made in the operationalization of the Berlin process, the reality in Libya remains grim. The active conflict has continued and foreign intervention will only further exacerbate it. Such foreign interference in Libya is a blatant violation of the sanctions regime set out by this Council. The continuous flow of arms, private military operatives, fighter jets, drones, and other assets must stop. In this regard, we note with content that the EU Operation Irini has already been able to demonstrate its effectiveness. The true price of the Libyan conflict will start revealing itself only now, and it will continue in the years to come. We were shocked and appalled to hear about the recent discoveries of the mass graves in Tarhuna, and we call on a thorough investigation to take place. It is critical to address all violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law, and to hold the perpetrators of such crimes accountable. We remain extremely concerned about the humanitarian situation in Libya. In addition to the increasing spread of COVID-19, deliberately planted landmines and other explosive devices remain a huge concern. We welcome the international efforts in demining the contaminated areas. Finally, we hope that the new special representative of the Secretary-General for Libya will be appointed very soon. It is important to have the UNSMIL and the UN facilitated political process in full capacity to ensure the best chances for success. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like first to thank the Secretary General for his intervention today and for his commitment to have a political solution prevail in Libya. Belgium condemns the war logic in which the Libyan parties seem to have locked themselves in with the increasing support of external actors. No valid reason exists for not responding positively and immediately to the multiple calls for ceasefire, including by this Council last week. Military action needs to stop immediately, independently of the location of the front lines. A dialogue remains the only sustainable solution to the crisis, and the parameters are well known. The Libyan political agreement, the principles agreed in Berlin, UNSMIL's three-tracks approach, and Resolution 2510. We welcome the timid steps taken in the Joint Military Commission in 5+5 format and urge the government and General Haftar to engage more forcefully and in good faith with UNSMIL in that forum. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity of a wider participation in today's meeting to address directly the states supporting the Libyan actors. Stop the negative impact and rather use your influence in a positive way by finally encouraging the path of dialogue. Most importantly, your words should be followed by concrete actions that demonstrate your commitment to the political solution. And let me thank those states around the table who have taken genuine initiatives for dialogue. I would also like to tell some of the states participating today, there is no excuse for not respecting the arms embargo. By violating it, you are contributing to the ongoing spiral of violence, exacerbating tensions between Libyans, and severely undermining a durable exit from the crisis. More importantly, you are contributing to the loss of life of innocent civilians, Libyans, and migrants. Mr. President, I want to reiterate that it is the responsibility of all parties to protect civilians, including the most vulnerable. I would like to reiterate here my country's commitment to ensuring that the most serious crimes committed in Libya do not go unpunished, whether in the national courts or the International Criminal Court. I welcome the establishment of a fact-finding mission by the Human Rights Council to investigate violations and abuses of international human rights law and international humanitarian law by all parties to the conflict. The FFM has also the mandate to preserve evidence with a view to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable. With this, important steps are taken towards ending impunity for terrible crimes that took place in Libya, as the discoveries in Tahuna and elsewhere sadly illustrate. We are deeply concerned by the continuous blockade of oil production, which has disastrous consequences for the economy of the country and the population as a whole. Libya's natural resources belong to all Libyans, and their exploitation is vital to maintain the country's economy, particularly given the need to address the COVID-19 pandemic. I urge to respect the civilian nature of all infrastructure and encourage further dialogue on how better sharing the revenues it generates. In closing, allow me to once again salute the courage and determination of the entire staff of UNSMIL and the whole country team. In that context, I would like to emphasize the urgent need for the appointment of a new SRSG. I thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And now I give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. At the outset, allow me, like others, to welcome you, Minister Mas, for presiding over the Council today, as well as welcoming all the honorable ministers in this August meeting. We also would like to thank the Secretary-General for his insightful briefings. We share many of the concerns as expressed by the Secretary-General. This month will mark the one-year anniversary of SRSG Salame's three-steps plan to end the current conflict in Libya. Throughout the year, implementing that plan has been met with numerous obstacles and challenges. We regret that the situation is deteriorating in the ground, albeit we also note that there is some progress. The GMC 5+5 talks, the economic dialogue, the Berlin conference, as well as UNSC Resolution 2510 of 2020 are the offspring of that plan. A great deal has been invested in these plans. Therefore, we must stay the path and continue our efforts for peace in Libya. Mr. President, on that note, let me focus on the following points. First, we support efforts for peace in Libya. In the pursuit of a lasting peace in Libya, Indonesia will consistently support regional and international efforts, such as the Berlin process. We acknowledge the principles in the Berlin communique, including in supporting and respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Libya, international laws and agreements, including the arms embargo, and in efforts to return to the political process for all Libyans. Supporting the Libyans to find peace is the responsibility of all, not only those who were in Berlin. We reiterate our call to the whole international community to provide honest and sincere support to the people of Libya. Support in enhancing development and prosperity, and not to increase insecurity and instability. Foreign interference must stop. It is important to align efforts with existing international corridors, including the relevant UN resolution. We welcome the efforts made by the Secretary General, including his phone call to Prime Minister Serraj and General Haftar, and support his plea for a political solution in Libya. We also reiterate our strong support to the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, especially during this crisis of COVID-19. The second point is that we need to focus our efforts to save Libyan lives. This includes those who are particularly vulnerable, women, children, and migrants. The shocking recent discovery of mass graves paint once again a grim picture of the failure to protect the innocents. We call on all parties to fully respect the international humanitarian laws and taking measures to protect all civilians. They must heed the call for a global ceasefire, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and give space for humanitarian assistance. We continue to support UNSMIL work for Libya and support the appointment of a new SRG for Libya as soon as possible. The third point is the importance of regional roles for peace in Libya. Efforts made by neighboring countries as well as regional organizations such as the African Union and the Arab League remain relevant and should be further encouraged. We realize that as neighbors, countries in the region felt the direct impact of the conflict. They should never be left out, as they provide a unique perspective for peace. Mr. President, the Council engagement on Libya has been long and winding. We had hoped that during our term in the Council, we could see conclusion. The people of Libya grew tired of empty narratives that have zero impact on the ground. They are tired to see brothers fighting brothers. They wanted us, the international community, not to meddle, but to find political solution, to find a lasting peace. Let us not throw away our shot for peace in Libya. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And our next speaker is the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Mr. Minister, thank you. Mr. Minister, I was tempted to speak my national language today, like some of my colleagues did, but abiding by your requests to be brief, I will skip it for the time being. Mr. President, we thank the Secretary General for the briefing. We thank you for holding this important session to discuss the situation in Libya. We welcome all high representatives of the Security Council member states, Libyan neighbors, participants of the Berlin Conference. The military and political situation in Libya continues to deteriorate. Continuing escalation prevents reaching a genuine ceasefire. Now the government of national accord, which with the help of intensive external support managed to push away the Libyan National Army, does not demonstrate willingness to engage in talks. Reports about Tripoli plans to launch an offensive in the direction of the port city of Sirte and Jufra Air Base do not facilitate the situation. The primary cause of the current dire situation in Libya is well known, although some of our colleagues are more comfortable to forget and ignore it. Today's disastrous state of affairs is the direct result of NATO military intervention in 2011 that breached the relevant UN Security Council resolution. African Union's peace initiatives were ignored at that time, and Libya's statehood was de facto dismantled and governance system destroyed. The armed forces and law enforcement bodies were dissolved, interregional and intercommunal relations were disbalanced. Another surge of violence caused more victims, first of all among civilians, and continues to destroy socio-economic infrastructure. The international community, despite all the efforts it takes, couldn't bring the opposing parties to the negotiating table. The Berlin Conference on Libya, held in January, gave hopes for some cautious optimism. Its results were supported by the UN Security Council Resolution 2510. However, the implementation of its results stumbles. The cause of it lies with the original sin in the resolution. It was not inclusive and it lacked support of all Libyan parties. On 6 June this year, President of Egypt, Mr. Sisi, proclaimed the Cairo Declaration. Supported by a number of states, including Russia, it provides for a new window of opportunity. We believe that in the current critical situation, all states that have influence on the opposing Libyan sides should do their utmost in order to ensure cessation of hostilities and launch meaningful negotiations. We will continue our contacts with countries that are interested in stabilization in Libya. We also find promising the initiative by Mr. Salih, chairman of the Libyan parliament. We continue consistently convince the Libyan protagonists to stop hoping for a military solution and engage in meaningful political process instead. This is the approach that we advocated during our recent contacts with representatives of the Libyan West and East. We see no alternative to political settlement under UN auspices. Regrettably, the situation additionally deteriorates because of Mr. Salami's resignation. The Office of Special Representative of the Secretary-General for Libya has been vacant for 4 months by now. This situation undermines efforts aimed at reconciliation in Libya. We assume that the authority and influence of the African Union makes a choice of an African representative to be entrusted with such a mission, logical and practical. We know that Africa has provided with a strong candidate for this task. In this regard, we encourage the Secretary-General to take decisive steps to appoint a new special representative for Libya, as we see no objective reason for delaying his or her appointment. Mr. President, today we once again heard accusations of our country of military interference into Libyan affairs. We stated on many occasions that there is not a single Russian military serviceman in the area of armed action in Libya. Neither is there any credible data about Russian citizens who would be taking part in armed clashes in Libya. But we know about other countries' military personnel, including from those countries that accuse us, to be present on Libyan soil, east and west. However, this does not confuse those who, for geopolitical reasons, seeks to create a false vision that Moscow allegedly interferes with the internal Libyan armed confrontation and openly siding with one of the parties. Unfortunately, some UN officials who are supposed to be neutral and impartial also got involved in such insinuations. In particular, we were surprised to learn that the current acting head of the UN mission in Libya, Ms. Williams, was reported to be spreading those allegations. This is inadmissible for a UN high-level official. I thank you, Mr. President.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Thank you for your statement and thank you for speaking English. And now I give the floor to the representative of the Dominican Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to start by welcoming Foreign Minister Mas and all the ministers joining us today. The Dominican Republic has continuously expressed in this council its deep concern in relation to the deterioration of human rights and humanitarian situation in Libya, stressing that all members must commit to saving lives and ending civilian suffering. It is in this regard that we strongly value and welcome the establishment of an international fact-finding mission to Libya. We urge the designated experts to independently and impartially implement the mandate, which includes establishing the facts and circumstances of the human rights situation through Libya and documenting alleged violations and abuses of international human rights law and international human rights law by all parties in Libya since the beginning of 2016. As a concrete example of the necessity of a fact-finding mission, we can reference the shocking recent discovery of at least 8 mass graves in June of 2020, the majority of them in and around the city of Tarhuna. Such atrocity requires a thorough and a transparent investigation in order to hold accountable and bring to justice the perpetrators of this and other human rights violations. Mr. President, despite the call for a global ceasefire, violence and attacks against civilians are increasing and thousands of Libyans are still being displaced. We remain concerned about the prevalence of killing and maiming of children, as well as torture and sexual violence against them, in addition to the flagrant abuses against migrants and refugees. Furthermore, we call for women rights defenders, peace builders, and political leaders to be able to carry out their work without restriction or fear of retaliation. Mr. President, the Dominican Republic welcomes all recent national and international efforts to bring about peace and stability in Libya, particularly the celebration of the third meeting of the International Follow-up Committee on Libya, as well as the first meeting of the International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights Working Group, and the resumption of the work of the intra-Libyan 5+5 Joint Military Commission. Regarding the latter, we urge all parties to work tirelessly to reach a formal, comprehensive, and permanent ceasefire agreement under UN auspices. Alongside the intra-Libyan process moving forward through the different tracks, members of this Council must prioritize and support a durable and peaceful Libyan-led resolution, preserving the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity of Libya. Relative to the arms embargo, its constant violations continue to be deplorable. This, in addition to the persistent interference by external actors, creates the perfect storm for the perpetuity of the Libyan conflict. We reiterate the need for all members of this United Nations to strictly adhere to their commitments to cease all forms of foreign military intervention in Libya and desist from any destabilizing activities that exacerbate the conflict. In regards to the oil blockade, we remind members that it has needlessly cost the Libyan people over $6 billion due to the loss of oil revenue, as well as millions of dollars of indirect losses due to the shutdown of domestic refineries and damage caused by the oil infrastructure remaining idle. We encourage the blockade to be fully lifted across the country for the benefit of all the Libyan people who already suffer unimaginable economic hardship. Mr. President, to conclude, we urge the Secretary-General to nominate a special representative for Libya as soon as possible. I thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to welcome Minister Mas and all ministers joining us today. I express my gratitude to German presidency for timely convening this important meeting. I thank Secretary General for its insightful meeting. I welcome the President of the distinguished representative of Libya, other country and regional organizations, as well as the acting SISGs for Libya and the head of the UNSMIL. Mr. President, in January 2020, the Berlin Conference was a silver lining to the gloomy situation in Libya at that time. The outcome of the conference and the subsequent adoption of Resolution 2510 provided hope for the pursuit of an inclusive, Libyan-led and Libyan-owned peace process on the basis of respect for Libya, independence and sovereignty. Since then, however, the situation in Libya had continued to witness ups and downs. Despite the truce agreement between the Libyan party and the initial success of the three-track dialogue of the Berlin process, the situation on the ground had actually worsened. Vietnam remained concerned over the ongoing violence, especially attacks on civilian and civilian objects, including school and healthcare facilities. The presence of the threat of terrorist groups continue to loom over the countries, which also affect the securities of the whole region. And with the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, the situation had become even more precarious. In that context, Vietnam wishes to highlight the following point. First, we call all the relevant parties in Libya to immediately stop fighting and return to peace talks. We also call all members of the international community, especially the Berlin participants, to spend no efforts in supporting the peace process. In line with Resolution 2510. Furthermore, the collaboration between UNSMIL, regional organization, and neighboring country in Libya will remain crucial. Second, Vietnam once again urges the relevant party in Libya to fully respect international humanitarian law, stop targeting civilian and civilian objects, ensure safety of healthcare workers, and allow unhindered humanitarian access to effectively fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Further attention and measures must be taken to protect women, children, and other vulnerable groups from the effect of the conflict. We welcome the effort of UNSMIL and UNSMIL Action Service in addressing humanitarian challenges in Libya. And we would also like to commend UNSMIL and AU in advancing the role of participation of women in peace process in Libya. Third, we reiterate the importance of upholding the relevant Security Council resolution on Libya, particularly those related to the arms embargo and the foreign interference. We urge all parties inside and outside of Libya to strengthen their commitment and actions in implementing this resolution, especially Resolution 2510. To conclude, we would like to commend the efforts of Ms. Williams and reaffirm our full support for the work of UNSMIL. At the same time, we would like to reiterate the importance of an appointment of the new HRSG for Libya. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission. Josep, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, dear Heiko, honorable members of the Security Council, many thanks for having invited the European Union to a debate on an issue so much relevant for us. The protracted conflict in Libya caused immense suffering for all Libyans and has become a major challenge for the region and ultimately for the international community. As the European Union, we believe it is high time to put an end to this military conflict right on our doorstep and manage a proper transition in Libya. We must preserve the country as one single Libya, united, stable, prosperous, and a reliable partner for all. This meeting brings together all countries which have the capacity, if genuinely committed, to contribute to a political transition in Libya. We all took strong commitments in Berlin Conference in January, and it's now time to translate our words into concrete actions. We need to work collectively under strong United Nations leadership to implement truly the conclusions of Berlin that everybody accepted. The polarization, which has turned Libya into a theater of proxy wars, needs to stop. Action in support of one or the other Libyan party fuel the conflict, and some constitute clear provocations. Unilateral initiatives go against the spirit of the consensual international dialogue, which Libya urgently needs and which we need to encourage. Excellencies, we must go back to our Berlin commitments, starting with the enforcement of the United Nations arms embargo, which unfortunately continues to be violated on all sides and every day, in all impunity, as we heard from the United Nations, as Heiko has remembered. And we need a collective effort to favor the return of the Libya parties to the negotiation table, starting with the UN-led 5+5 military talks to reach an agreement on a sustainable ceasefire. And we support the initiative to demilitarize the conflict around Sirte and Jufra. We, at the European Union, we are doing our part You have promoted a strong European Union commitment to the Berlin process to respect and implement what we all agreed. That's why we launched Operation Irini, which core task to implement UN's arms embargo and to stop the flow of weapons into Libya, as well as to monitor oil smuggling. We are reporting regularly to the United Nations panel of experts on the basis of the mandate given by the United Nations Security Council. It is also clear that control of arms flow into Libya requires action beyond the maritime domain, but for that, the Security Council should enlarge the mandate. Finally, as co-chair of the Economic Group, we also hope to find a sustainable solution for the exploitation of oil resources in Libya, a key issue in the conflict which is directly linked to the increasingly build-up of presence in Sirte. That's of the utmost importance. All of the European help to Libya is the equivalent of less than a week of the oil resources that the country can obtain normally. Later this month, we will co-host the next international follow-up committee on Libya, where these discussions should continue. Excellencies, dear ministers, colleagues, we need ambassadors, we need to work towards these goals together. Stop all interferences that are fueling the conflict and join forces to support an inclusive, Libyan-owned and Libyan-led process leading to a political solution. I thank for your attention.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for your statement and your participation today. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abu Ghaid, Secretary-General of the League of Arab States.
Thank you, President, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas. The League of Arab States highly appreciates the initiative by Germany to convene this meeting, which affords us the opportunity to advance the linkage between the Berlin process and the Security Council in addressing the situation in Libya. We remain fully committed to the implementation of the Berlin Conference conclusions in their entirety, including in our capacity as current chair of the International Follow-up Committee and as co-chair of its political working group. We are all aware of the complexities of the conflict and the challenges we face in its resolution. These have been exacerbated by the insistent external military interventions on the ground, the ongoing disregard for the arms embargo, and the uninterrupted deployment of foreign mercenaries to the battlefield. This open-ended proxy interference in one of our Arab member states is unacceptable. Our position remains firm and clear, as we articulated once again during the Arab League Emergency Ministerial Meeting 2 weeks ago, in calling for the immediate cessation of hostilities and withdrawal of all foreign forces present on Libyan territory. The Berlin process was essentially designed to uphold these commitments, yet they remain the subject of systematic violations, as is the case with the Council's own resolutions. This pernicious dynamic must change if we are to have any chance of returning Libya on the path towards a comprehensive political resolution of the conflict. The roadmap before us is clear. It was agreed in Berlin and was endorsed by the Council in Resolution 2510. It was also recently afforded us additional momentum by the Cairo Declaration. Our immediate priority must focus on de-escalating the situation on the ground, especially around Sirte. We must continue to press the GNA and the LNA to engage in 5+5 negotiations and reach a permanent ceasefire agreement under UN supervision. And we must assist Libyan parties and stakeholders in relaunching an inclusive political process to end Libya's transition. We also recognize the urgency of restoring Libya's oil production under the authority of the NOS, NOC for the benefit of all Libyans, and with arrangements for the equitable and transparent utilization of revenues. All of these tracks must remain wholly Libyan-led and Libyan-owned under the auspices of UNSMIL and with the full support of the international community. They can only succeed in an environment free of all forms of intervention by external actors and away from the threat posed by illegal armed groups and militias. The Arab League will continue to accompany the Libyan parties to pursue these three security, political, and economic tracks in a manner that safeguards Libya's sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity. We remain fully opposed to any attempt to turn Libya into yet another theater of external military adventurism or demarcate its territory into zones of foreign influence. And our ultimate objective must be anchored in enabling the Libyan people to establish their permanent, unified, and legitimate national institutions via free, fair, and credible elections that can only be held under an agreed legal and constitutional framework and in a conducive political environment and permissible security situation. We call on all Berlin participants to recommit in word and deed to these goals, and we urge the members of the Security Council to unite in exercising their responsibility in concert with the Arab League to extricate Libya from this perilous abyss. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I think he is, but we can see.
This is the German Perm Rep. The minister had to step out for a moment. I thank His Excellency Ahmed Abul-Ghaid, Secretary-General of the Arab League, for his statement. And I now give the floor to Ismail Chergui, the Commissioner for Peace and Security of the African Union. You have the floor. Scott, are we getting His Excellency, Mr. Chergui? Scott, your mic is out. It's Minister, the Italian Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, dear colleagues, friends. I wish to commend Germany, President of the UN Security Council, for convening this session on Libya. I thank Secretary-General Guterres and commend UN efforts. The situation in Libya remains extremely concerning. The unstable balance on the ground is a consequence of a series of strategic mistakes over the last 10 years, the latest of which was the military attack to Tripoli on April 4th, 2019. When I was in Tripoli a few weeks ago, I conveyed a message of self-restraint and moderation to President Sarraj. The same message must be conveyed to General Haftar, as we are witnessing a military build-up also from the east. Our collective support must stand with any proposal leading to a political solution, as long as it is fully inclusive, completely Libyan-owned, and firmly anchored in the Berlin process. Italy is responding to humanitarian concerns by helping the Libyan government dispose of threat of landmines and booby traps in and around Tripoli. I wish to make 4 brief points. First, all foreign interference in Libya in violation of the arms embargo must stop. To this end, the European Union has launched Operation Irini. Italy has always supported a stronger role of the EU and is determined to ensure that the operation is balanced and conflict sensitive. We call upon all the countries to cooperate loyally to halt all arms transfers via air, land or sea. Public statements must be matched by concrete commitments. Second, we need to establish a real ceasefire. Any agreement should be taken in the framework of the Berlin process. We fully support the UN-mediated negotiations within the Joint Military Committee 5+5. UNSMIL should stand ready to favor a ceasefire agreement in the framework of the Berlin process, including, as also referred by Minister Mas, through the definition of a demilitarized zone that would help diffuse tensions and reduce the military presence in the area. Third, we should resume immediately a political dialogue in view a fully inclusive and Libyan-owned political solution. We took note of the Cairo initiative and the agreement between President Aguila and General Haftar, but we must strive for a fully inclusive Libyan-owned political solution. Fourth, we must reach a prompt reactivation of oil production. We are ready to support a Libyan solution for a more equitable and transparent distribution of financial resources. In this framework, the proposal by NOC Chairman Sanalla goes in the right direction. At 6 months from the conference, it is our collective responsibility to stick to the Berlin commitments. I convey to you Italy's sense of urgency to appoint a new UN Special Representative on Libya. I call upon all members of this Council and all countries to work toward our common goal to stabilize Libya for the sake of the Libyan population. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Luigi Di Maio, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Internal Cooperation of Italy, for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Ismail Chergui, the Commissioner for Peace and Security of the African Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me, at the outset, thank Minister Heiko Maas for convening this important meeting on the situation in Libya, and welcome the presentation of His Excellency Secretary-General António Guterres and our sister Foreign Minister of South Africa, Dr. Pandor, who is also the chair of the Executive Council as the chair of the Union for this year. Mr. President, the situation in Libya remains of great concern to the African Union. Since the beginning of this year, the African Union High-Level Committee has met 4 times, first in January in Brazzaville, 2nd February at the African Union Summit here in Addis, last March in Oyo, and in May during a high-level virtual meeting. This is a demonstration of our resolve as continent to find a lasting solution to the crisis in the brotherly country. As we speak, there are ongoing efforts by our leaders to secure a ceasefire and bring the parties to the negotiation table. Unfortunately, on the ground, despite limited direct confrontation between the government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army in the last few weeks, we are observing a military buildup on both sides in anticipation of more fighting, particularly near the town of Sirte. In more recent development, on July 5, foreign fighter jets targeted the Al Wataniya air base in western Libya and damaged air defense systems installed in place. These incidents raised concern that the airstrikes could further deepen foreign military involvement in the country, when time and again we all said that there is no military solution to the crisis. Mr. President, it is unfortunate that despite numerous calls and despite the commitments made during the Berlin conference, the flow of sophisticated weapons and mercenaries into Libya continues unabated. This is in violation of numerous United Nations Security Council resolutions and arms embargo on Libya. The time has come for the Council to take actions and consider appropriate measures for those who consistently made it or make it difficult to find a solution to this crisis. On the political front, there is a little progress to report. The diplomatic engagement witnessed in the last few weeks have been each side lobbying for support for their position or mediation to lift the oil blockage. No tangible results was registered in the securing a lasting ceasefire. The 5+5 Joint Military Commission meeting that met last June virtually discussed preconditions for ceasefire. We need to redouble our efforts to secure a lasting ceasefire, a prerequisite for genuine dialogue and reconciliation. It is also high time for the international community to recognize the value of political track that is bottom-up and people-centered approach. Indeed, it is the Libyan people who are the sole custodian of the legitimacy. Mr. President, we are pleased that the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution on 22 of June to establish an international fact-finding mission to Libya to promote accountability for the human rights abuse in the country. We were also encouraged by the UN's intention to investigate possible war crimes and crimes against humanity in Libya and to look into the recent uncovered mass graves in and around Tarhona. The African Union has made similar calls for an independent and transparent investigation into the mass graves, not only in Tarhona, but into the human rights violation carried out in the country since the beginning of the civil conflict. The already difficult humanitarian situation in the country has been further complicated by COVID-19 pandemic. As of June 5, the numbers of cases stood at 1,046, including 25 deaths. The epicenter of seems to be southern Libya, which has reached half of the cases reported. Meanwhile, civilians continue to be impacted by the conflict. Humanitarian access and clearances remain difficult to obtain in the cities of Tarhona, Bani Walid, and Sirte. The military build-up by both parties compromised the fate of 125,000 civilians in and around Sirte, with an estimated 60,000 remaining inside the city and deemed to be at immediate risk. This year, a total of approximately 5,300 refugees, migrants, have been intercepted, rescued at sea, and returned to Libya, the majority of them taken to detention facilities. Just this week, more than 300 were rescued from the sea. The African Union and its member states continue to grapple with the issue of human trafficking, and we are deeply concerned about the fate of African migrants in Libya. I would like to take this opportunity to call once again for the international protection of African migrants held and detained in Libya with the purpose of utilizing them as combatants and/or human shields, and for their repatriation to their countries of origin. Mr. President, we are pleased that all four international follow-up committees on Libya technical working groups have continued their interaction and are making progress. We would like to see their work translated into an impact on the ground to alleviate the prolonged suffering and despair of the Libyan people. In conclusion, I count on my colleagues today around this table to go above and beyond the review of the political and security situation and to focus on an immediate cessation of hostilities and return to the political dialogue. It is also time for the accountability. This war was imposed on the people of Libya 9 years ago. The last we can give them is to hold accountable those who refuse to end their suffering. I thank you for your kind attention.
We thank His Excellency Dr. Ismail Shagri, the Commissioner for the African Union for Peace and Security, for his statement. And I give the floor now to His Excellency Sameh Shoukry, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Egypt. Sameh, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Heiko Maas, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany and President of the United Nations Security Council for the month of July, distinguished representatives, member states of the UN Security Council, colleagues. At the outset, I would like to congratulate France for its leadership of the Security Council during the month of June, and I am confident that the Federal Republic of Germany will effectively discharge its responsibilities during the month of July. I must also thank Germany for convening this important session on Libya and for inviting pivotal regional players such as Egypt and other partners who attended the Berlin summit to participate in today's session. Mr. President, Libya has been engulfed for almost a decade in an escalating crisis. This conflict is claiming countless lives in Libya and continues, despite our best efforts, to constitute a serious threat to stability and security throughout a region encumbered with the heavy burdens of innumerable challenges. The reason for this Libyan predicament, which bedevils the international community, is clear. Contradictory visions for the future of Libya and aspirations of regional hegemony have complicated the efforts of an international community to realize our common objective of laying the foundations of a peaceful and prosperous Libya. Egypt has been steadfast in its support of every effort and initiative to reach a settlement to the situation in Libya. From Sukhairat to Berlin, we have been actively engaged in the political process, including by facilitating contacts and negotiations between Libyan parties. Unfortunately, however, large swaths of Western Libya have become footholds for extremism and safe havens for terrorist organizations. These forces of evil have often sought to extend their dark shadow over Egypt by infiltrating our western borders and have occasionally exacted the heavy price of the lives of dozens of men, women, and children, often peacefully worshipping in mosques and churches. In this regard, it must be noted that such deadly infiltrations have dramatically decreased due to efforts by the Libyan National Army to secure the eastern areas of Libya, thereby reinforcing the established norm that the responsibility of preserving the nation's security must remain within the legitimate institutions of governance authorized to bear arms and not in the hands of irregular militias that seek to promote personal or ideological agendas at the expense of the Libyan people. Mr. President, the last time I addressed the security wake of the terrible crime that shocked the conscience of humankind when 21 Egyptians working in the city of Sirte were mercilessly slaughtered by Daesh terrorists in early 2015. That appalling act of barbarism impelled the Council to adopt Resolution 2214, urging member states to combat by all means and in accordance with the UN Charter threats to international peace and security caused by terrorist acts. I am dismayed, however, to report that Daesh fighters are resurfacing in Libya and have recently appeared in some cities of western Libya, especially in Sabratha. I therefore take this opportunity to reiterate the fact that member states are duty-bound to combat terrorism in Libya, including by firmly and resolutely condemning any form of support or sustenance extended by any regional player to the forces of extremism. Mr. President, this situation is further aggravated by the transfer by a regional player of extremist fighters from Syria to Libyan territories, as reported on a daily basis by the Syrian Observatory on Human Rights. This is a very serious threat to the security of Libyans as well as to neighboring states and to both shores of the Mediterranean. Such threats constitute a clear and present danger to Egypt. We will not tolerate threats of this nature as they approach our borders, and which are aided, abetted, and actively supported by foreign intervention. Support for extremism must cease and desist. It is incumbent upon us to put an end to the sources of aid and assistance from regional players that are obviously not keen on preserving the stability of the Mediterranean region. Resolving this issue and resisting these policies is essential to our efforts to protecting the future of our people and that of the Libyan people. Mr. President, Egypt's principal position is premised on supporting a political solution for a unified Libya, as expressed by the Cairo Declaration issued on June 6, 2020, which is in complete conformity with the conclusions of the Berlin Summit and the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, as well as the decisions of the League of Arab States and the African Union. Accordingly, attaining stability in Libya depends on reconstituting the Presidency Council, forming an independent government agreed upon by all Libyans, parties and approved by the House of Representatives, as well as disarming militias, combating terrorism, unifying the army, and guaranteeing an equitable distribution of wealth. Egypt is resolute in its determination to preserve these fundamental tenets of a political solution. Indeed, in his statement of June 20th, 2020, which was delivered in the military base of Sidi Barrani in the Western Desert, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reaffirmed Egypt's call for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire in Libya, insisting that all parties refrain from all military activity, thereby providing the opportunity for the resumption of the political process involving all legitimate Libyan parties to reach a Libyan-owned solution. This Security Council session presents us with a unique opportunity to call for an immediate nationwide ceasefire in Libya. This would be an important step towards the revival of the political talks in Geneva under the auspices of the United Nations and within the context of the Berlin parameters. Mr. President, it is imperative for the international community to exert every effort to help the Libyan people achieve stability in their country and find a path to peace. Egypt will provide its assistance and support to Libya, our direct neighbor, and its people with whom we are bound by ties of fraternity in their quest to guarantee the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of their state with stable and efficient institutions of government that serve all Libyans equally and that is free of non-state actors and militias that polarize society and destabilize our region. Our hope is to ensure that Libya remains free of foreign intervention and assist this great nation in resuming its essential and positive role as a force for prosperity and stability in the Arab world and Africa. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Sameh Shoukry, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Egypt, for his statement, and I now give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Algeria, His Excellency Mr. Sabri Boukadem. Sabri, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My best wishes to Heiko. Dear Secretary General, dear friends and colleagues, for 9 years now, Libya is entangled in a crisis that is having a high toll on the Libyan first, but also on the international community, mainly the neighboring countries, amongst them Algeria. The time has come to root out the causes of the unending and unacceptable situation. Needless to go to the reasons that brought about this crisis. We need rather to work preferably together on operational and practical solutions that must be based first on ceasefire and the free will of the Libyans, and also the support of the international community. We do have the instruments, multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions, the Berlin Conference conclusions and outcome, the commitment of neighboring countries, the support of the declared support of the international stakeholders, and the declared willingness of both of the Libyan parties themselves. We do support all sincere efforts for the goals of peace, cohesion, and reconstruction. Algeria has from the very start lent its unwavering support to the Berlin Conference outcomes that were confirmed by UNSC Resolution 2510. We have ourselves engaged in helping the Libyans to unravel the complexity of the situation they were dug into, sometimes and somehow not by their free choice. Let me state it as clearly as possible. Algeria is in no position to let go Libya towards uncharted future. Libya is part of us, and we will not leave this part of us suffer, or let's say, not to say, sink in man-provoked tumultuous waters. The security of all neighboring countries, amongst them Algeria, depend on the peace, security, and territorial integrity of Libya. No one should ignore that our deep-rooted family ties, our common history, and our common future impose naturally our stand. The Algerian approach, overwhelmingly called for and accepted by all Libyans, is based on the following elements: immediate ceasefire, de-escalation in all areas, including the question of energy and resources of wealth that must be distributed to all Libyans, and lastly, to help assemble the representatives of Libya around the table of negotiation. There is no solution but a political one. It means no military solution. And there is no political solution if the external forces continue to mango in Libya through total disrespect of the arms embargo that our council, that your council, has set forth. We do support once again the Berlin conclusions, and we will steadfastly participate in all the tracks in the follow-up, with the hope that all, not only the Libyans, will truly engage upon. Let me add that we hope that the UN Secretary-General will finally have a say on the designation of a special representative. And with our support and the support of the international community and that of the neighboring countries, will be a very easy step, a good signal for a long expected restart for Libya. Let me add that our country will endeavor within the international frameworks, we should not forget the African Union and the projected inter-Libyan conference, through all the work to helping all Libyans, tribes, regions, territory, inclusively, to decide the future they want and the outcome they will freely choose, their institutions, and through the procedures they will choose also. The Libyans, and only the Libyans, will decide the country with no more interference, no more weapons of war, and no more mercenaries. It is not the case yet today at this very moment when we are speaking strongly to support Libya, unfortunately. This solution that we want to promote and that seem to be supported by all Libyans in their differences will definitely preserve in the future the legitimate interest of all stakeholders involved currently in Libya. This is our shared responsibility to make that day real. The choice for a peaceful tomorrow depends on the Libyan, obviously, but also of us all here around this table. And please, we have to stop that cynical absurdity that Heiko has so rightfully pinpointed. It is up to us to send a message of hope to the Libyan people today. And I thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, for Foreign Affairs of Algeria for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Anwar Mohamed Gagash, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our German conveners. Thank you very much for bringing us all together. We join other delegations thanking you for convening today's virtual meeting. We express our gratitude to the United Nations Secretary-General also for his briefing. The United Arab Emirates has long held a consistent and clear position on the Libyan crisis. A political solution is the only viable option to resolve the conflict. We continue to call for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire agreement and resume a Libyan-led political dialogue under the UN auspices. A ceasefire and political dialogue constitute the only way forward to end control that militias have over large parts of Libya and ensure lasting security and stability in Libya and an end to the suffering of the Libyan people. Now more than ever, a ceasefire has become an urgent priority to allow an effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic and prevent more suffering of the civilian population. Many of the countries represented at this meeting participated in the Berlin Conference earlier this year. The UAE supports Germany's efforts to bring us together once again. Since the Berlin Conference, the UAE has urged stakeholders in the Libyan conflict to support UNSMIL in implementing the conclusions document. We have also actively and in good faith participated in the meetings of the International Follow-up Committee on Libya, in addition to economic, political security, human rights, and international human rights law working groups. However, 6 months after the conference, the UAE regrets the deterioration of the security situation in the country. This downward spiral can be attributed to the continuous foreign regional interference in Libya's internal affairs. There are now roughly 10,000 Syrian mercenaries operating in Libya, approximately twice as many as there were 6 months ago. The growing presence of mercenaries and foreign fighters exacerbates the conflict and undermines our common objective for a peaceful political solution for Libya. We are deeply concerned over the serious threats to regional peace and stability that result from the ongoing foreign interference in Libya. The UAE echoes the League of Arab States Resolution 8523 of 23 June 2020, and in particular, the rejection of all and any foreign intervention in Libya. The resolution also welcomed all efforts by the neighboring countries aimed at resuming the political process in Libya under the auspices of the United Nations. In this regard, the UAE commends the leadership of President Sisi of Egypt and the Cairo initiative to support the implementation of the Berlin conclusions. Mr. President, the UAE reiterates its call on all signatories to fully respect the commitments they have made in Berlin, and on all UN member states to support the Berlin conclusions and UNSMIL efforts to de-escalate the situation and rebuild trust between relevant stakeholders in Libya. The EU's Operation Irene can also play an important role in ensuring the continued commitments of all the signatories to Berlin as long as it is implemented consistently. Finally, I would like to call on the Security Council to remain engaged on this file to prevent further instability in Libya and continue to advance a political solution. The appointment of a new special representative should be a priority to achieve what we all seek for stability and peace in Libya. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Dr. Anwar Mohamed Gargash, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates, for his statement, and I give the floor now to His Excellency Mr. Sedat Unal, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank first the German presidency for organizing this important meeting. Almost 10 years have passed since Libyans expressed their desire for freedom and democracy. The quest of Libyan people for democracy that started with the February Revolution in 2011 continues unabated. Their aspirations are very much alive. Attempts at resurrecting a totalitarian regime will only cause further destabilization in Libya and the entire region. It's been more than a year now when Haftar launched its aggression against the government of national accord, the legitimate government of Libya that was endorsed by this chamber. From the outset, Turkey's position has been loud and clear. There can be no military solution to the ongoing conflict in Libya. We have consistently supported and contributed to international efforts, whether in Rome, Skhirat, Paris, Moscow, or Berlin, in order to revitalize a Libyan-led, Libyan-owned political process under UN auspices. A viable and genuine political process can only be advanced once a sustainable ceasefire is achieved in the country. Mr. President, despite the explicit provisions of the UN Security Council Resolution 2259, many actors have engaged with the parallel entities in Libya. This attitude has served as no more than a license for Haftar to continue his aggression against the legitimate government, denounce the Libyan political agreement, and even declare his own military dictatorship. Actually, placing the aggressor on an equal footing with the legitimate UN-recognized government is wrong and counterproductive. This grave mistake must be corrected. In the case of supporters of Haftar, providing brazen political and military support to this warlord in pursuit of subversive objectives against the legitimate government are incompatible with international law and relevant UN resolutions, and actually harmful for peace and stability in Libya and beyond. Putting the blame sometimes, as some countries have done today, on Turkey, all the while working at cross purposes with the United Nations and the political process, sometimes amounts to hypocrisy and cannot be accepted. On the other side, any unilateral initiative put forward in the absence of the legitimate government is ill-fated and cannot be conducive for a political process. Actually, the Berlin Framework provides the necessary architecture for intra-Libyan talks under UN auspices. Another major shortcoming relates to EU's Operation Irene, which was launched without due consultations with the GNA. In an environment where Haftar acquires all the arms and support it needs through land and air, the operation practically sanctions only the legitimate government. This issue must be addressed. In this context, French claims on the nature of the incident between our ships are simply unsubstantiated. Turkey regards it as an international obligation to support the legitimate government in its endeavors to protect legitimacy and civilian lives. With the technical and training assistance that we provided upon the government's request, the GNA sustained a balance on the ground and a bigger humanitarian crisis has been prevented. Mr. President, continuing illegal oil blockade is another issue of critical importance for the Libyan people. Libya has lost more than $6 billion since last January due to the 7-month-long oil blockade. It should be lifted immediately, and the control of oil facilities should be returned to the national oil company. The discovery of mass graves in the city of Tarhuna is a grim reminder of the proportions of atrocities and human suffering in Libya. Actually, this must be a wake-up call for all sides who have condoned or supported Haftar's aggression to varying degrees. International community and relevant organizations must take urgent steps to investigate this matter. As such, we welcome the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court's decision to deploy a mission to conduct investigations on the ground. Human Rights Council's decision to set up a fact-finding mission in Libya is also expected to deliver results on this very important matter. The mines and improvised explosive devices placed in the neighborhoods by Haftar's militias before they retreat is yet another brutal method aimed to terrorize the civilians. These war crimes must be investigated, and all perpetrators must be held accountable. Before concluding, I would like to reiterate Turkey's commitment to help achieve a sustainable political solution in Libya. For this purpose, we will continue our contributions in the Berlin follow-up mechanisms and the working groups. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Sedat Önal, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey, for his statement, and I give the floor to His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Yassim Al Thani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Qatar. You have the floor. You have to unmute yourself.
Mr. President, we congratulate Germany on assuming the presidency of the Council, wishing you all success, and we appreciate the efforts of France during its presidency of the Council last month. We also thank His Excellency António Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, for his briefing. Mr. President, for over a year, the Libyan capital, Tripoli, was the scene of attacks by illegal militias, which have targeted innocent Libyan civilians and the internationally recognized legitimate government. They have committed serious violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including attacks on healthcare facilities, even in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. When a missile strike targeted a hospital equipped to treat a coronavirus patient in Tripoli, in addition, landmines placed by those militias resulted in scores of Libyan casualties. Not to mention the continued systematic extrajudicial killing. The international community has as well as recently witnessed the mass graves in areas that were controlled by the illegal militias. The State of Qatar reiterates its condemnation of those dangerous illegal practices. It further warns against supporting a certain party against another. It has become clear and that the only way to solve the Libyan crisis is through comprehensive ceasefire and stopping the support of the illegal factions, and support of the Government of National Accord, commitment to implementation of the Skhirat Agreement, Security Council resolutions, and the outcomes of Berlin Conference. Mr. President, Skhirat Agreement was unanimously endorsed by this United Nations Security Council, which recognized the GNA as the sole legitimate executive authority in Libya. Unfortunately, some countries initially endorsed this agreement, but have subsequently disrespected the agreement by supporting opposing factions and empowering them against the government. This is how we have reached where we are now. If the international community is serious about solving the situation, any agreed political solution based on dialogue and understanding must include a clear and effective international mechanism to hold to account the states that do not abide by these agreements. Not only should the international community hold certain factions accountable for the current state of affairs in Libya, but it should also hold to account the countries that empower them for the violations of international law. Unfortunately, we have witnessed systematic violation against the GNA and Skhirat Agreement, while the international community have remained silent. We stress the need to return to negotiations and national dialogue and complete the transitional period. We call for a solution that preserves Libya's sovereignty and unity, realizes the aspiration of the Libyan people, and leads to building the state that the Libyans seek and deserve, away from narrow interests, personal ambitions, and malicious agendas, and unlawful external interference. The international community and the United Nations must work to provide the support necessary to achieve this objective. Mr. President, to conclude, the State of Qatar reaffirms its support to the efforts of the United Nations and the UNSMIL in implementing its mandate. It also renews its call on actors to ensure respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and to hold accountable those responsible for the violation and serious crimes. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman bin Yassim Al Thani, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Qatar, for his statement. And I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Congo. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate Germany for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of July and convey to you the warmest greetings of your counterpart, His Excellency Mr. Jean-Claude Dankoso, Foreign Minister of Congo, who was unexpectedly unable to take part in this important debate. I would like to express on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo and Chairman of the African Union High-Level Committee on Libya, the heartfelt gratitude of my delegation for the invitation to Congo, extended to Congo, to take part in today's timely meeting dedicated to the situation in Libya. May I take this opportunity to reiterate our high appreciation to Her Excellency Chancellor Angela Merkel for her commitment through the Berlin process. The Berlin Conference, held in January 2020, was critical as it opened the path to all participating international stakeholders to the peace process in Libya to speak in one voice, and on that occasion, all of them made the commitment to comply with the arms embargo and refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of Libya. As the chair of the African Union High-Level Committee on Libya, President Denis Sassou Nguesso underscored in his opening remarks at the meeting of the committee in January 2020, following his participation in this historical event. Berlin Conference was a momentum of catharsis and acknowledged the critical role of Africa. Libya is an African country and an African Union member state. On that account, Africa has been playing its part in the Libyan crisis. In this endeavor, I would like to recognize the UN Secretary-General Guterres' commendable commitment to work in partnership with the African Union, and namely with the AU Committee, and invite him to diligently appoint his special representative for Libya. Mr. President, unfortunately, there is an ongoing war situation in Libya with its dire humanitarian consequences. The interferences from global and regional powers have changed the Libyan conflict into a proxy international war. Libya has become the sanctuary of terrorist groups and mercenaries from various horizons. May I convey to this Council the following message of His Excellency President Denis Sassou Nguesso, Chairman of the African Union High-Level Committee on Libya and Chair of the Committee Contact Group. The mandate of the committee, as it is declined in its roadmap. This roadmap reflects the intangible Africa Union position on the situation in Libya, which is in line with the Berlin Conference. On this grounds, the African Union Committee calls on an immediate ceasefire to be urgently implemented, particularly in this context of COVID-19. 2, the strict compliance with the embargo on arms. 3, the resumption of the political negotiation based on a wider representation. 4, the disarmament of armed groups. 5, the revival of Cairo process. And 6, the holding of a reconciliation forum in Addis Ababa under the auspices of the African Union. The forum will then consider the roadmap to the general elections in Libya. But for these challenges to be addressed successfully, unity of the members of this body is the key, and the interferences of foreign powers in this conflict must end. The African Union High-Level Committee on Libya, in close partnership with the UN Secretary-General, continue to support an all-inclusive political approach with all Libyans with a view to end this conflict. There is no military solution to the conflict. The committee calls upon the Security Council to take on its responsibility and reiterates its commitment to play part in harmony with the African Union Commission and the consensus built upon the Berlin Declaration. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency the Ambassador of Congo for his intervention, and I now pass the floor to the Permanent Representative of Switzerland. Pascal, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I would like to start by thanking Germany for the organization of today's important debate and for the invitation to speak as a co-chair, together with our partners from the Netherlands, of the International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights Working Group of the Berlin Process. Switzerland is deeply concerned about the deterioration of the situation in Libya and calls on all parties to the armed conflict to respect international humanitarian law in all circumstances. We also urge all those who bear responsibilities to fully respect and protect human rights. Switzerland thus supported the establishment of an independent, international and impartial fact-finding mission, knowing that investigation of violations is essential to guarantee accountability. In order for the Berlin Process Working Group to successfully implement its mandate, it requires not only the full backing of the Libyans, but also of the international community, and in particular of this distinguished council. 3 issues should be immediately acted upon. First, the cessation of hostilities. For any progress towards sustaining peace to be achieved, it is now time to silence the weapons and to call all parties to the negotiation table. Therefore, we support the Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire and welcome the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2532. As one of the host countries of the peace talks led by the United Nations, we will continue to support their organization in Geneva. Second, in light of the deterioration of the situation in Libya, UNSMIL needs a robust mandate to be able to monitor and report violations of human rights and of international humanitarian law on the ground, as well as to ensure close follow-up of the Berlin process. Therefore, Switzerland strongly encourages the strengthening of the human rights component of UNSMIL through the allocation of necessary resources. And third, finally, the peace efforts must include and reach out to relevant Libyan stakeholders, including the civil society, in order to ensure the inclusive nature of the Berlin process and anchor it in the reality on the ground. For this purpose, in its role as a co-chair, Switzerland will aim for tangible progress, in particular in regard to key humanitarian aspects, such as improving the humanitarian access and ensuring the protection and assistance of the civilian population. Before closing, let me address the issue of the establishment of a demilitarized zone around Sirte and Kufra, which has been referred to. It certainly has the potential to prevent the emergence of renewed hostility amongst parties to the conflict. Of course, its operational modalities would need to be looked at in detail. In the meantime, in its capacity of co-chair of the IHL-HR working group of the Berlin process, Switzerland calls upon all countries to exert their influence over the parties in order to agree on a ceasefire as a matter of emergency. In line with its long-standing commitment and holistic approach to Libya, Switzerland will continue promoting cooperation across conflict lines and supporting Libyan officials in overcoming the institutional divides. I thank you, Mr. President.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And now I give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And let me start with apologizing on behalf of Minister Stef Blok, who had looked forward so much to participating in this important session. He valued your personal invitation, Minister, but he had to cancel it because of unforeseen developments which required his urgent attention. And my minister asked me to convey his deep appreciation for the efforts of Germany on the issue at hand in general, and your personal efforts, Minister Maas in particular. And also, we highly value the role Germany plays as chair of the Libya Sanctions Committee. Mr. President, we are now nearly 6 months after the Berlin conference. We commend the efforts by UNSMIL and acting SRSG Williams specifically in continuing the momentum created in January. And this in spite of the unprecedented times we are now facing with the COVID-19 crisis. This indeed is a Herculean task. Continuous disregard of the weapons embargo and increased foreign intervention have driven Libya to a point of regional escalation. It puts all people of Libya at risk. These developments endanger Libya's territorial integrity and its sovereignty. And this runs counter to what the United Nations and the Security Council in particular stand for. And we call on all members to recommit to the Berlin conclusions and move towards de-escalation, especially in the short term around Sirte and Jufra. And the Kingdom of the Netherlands therefore supports the idea proposed by you, Minister Maas, just now in your national statement to demilitarize this area and to create a buffer zone there. So we commend you for that initiative. Mr. President, we very much welcome the resumption of the 5+5 military talks and call on them to settle on a lasting ceasefire and discard the zero-sum attitude. We are also encouraged by the various political initiatives and prospects of Libya talks in Geneva under UNSMIL auspices. Mr. President, as our Swiss colleague just mentioned, we are proud to have joined the International Follow-up Committee on Libya by co-chairing with Switzerland of the International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights Working Group. And let me just underline the points just made by Pascale. We need to actively deal with the horrors of the conflict, such as the horrific mass graves around Tarhuna. We must hold the perpetrators to account. And the Kingdom of the Netherlands fully supports a statement to that effect just now of our Belgian colleague. Accountability is crucial to break the vicious cycle of violence based on revenge and impunity. And in this context, we also welcome the establishment of the fact-finding mission as well as the work of the ICC. We call on all parties, national and international, to provide the necessary support for their activities. Mr. President, let me end with reiterating our support to UNSMIL to bring about a lasting solution to the Libyan crisis within the framework of the Berlin conclusions. The Kingdom of the Netherlands believes that all parties in Libya should engage in serious political dialogue. Any solution to the Libyan crisis should be Libyan-led and Libyan-owned, as many of the other speakers today have already said. The Libyan people have suffered from insecurity far too long. The people of Libya deserve to live in a peaceful, secure and prosperous country. Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And now our next speaker is His Excellency Nikolaos Denias, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece. Nikos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heiko. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like first and foremost to congratulate Germany on assuming the presidency of the Council and thank you for the opportunity to participate at today's meeting. At the same time, I would like to thank the Secretary-General for his insightful briefing in his assessment of the situation. At this critical juncture of the conflict, and in light of the risk of a deterioration of the situation, the Berlin process remains the anchor of the international community's efforts towards a genuine political solution. Respect of this body's resolutions and the Berlin Conference conclusions should be our guiding principles. This will lead to a viable and credible ceasefire and to the eventual return of the parties to the negotiating table. The strict implementation and respect of the arms embargo, along with the cessation of hostilities by all parties, are the key elements that will pave the way to the resolution to the conflict. In this vein, Greece fully supports the Secretary-General's and UNSMIL's efforts for a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned process towards a peaceful and stable Libya. Any solution should be free from external interference and from actions that exacerbate the conflict and are contrary to the interests of the Libyan people. At this point, allow me to highlight, please, as other colleagues before me, the European Union's tangible contribution to the implementation of the arms embargo through the establishment of Operation Irene. In addition, any initiative aiming at the resumption of inter-Libyan dialogue under the Berlin umbrella, such as the Egyptian one of June the 6th, should be encouraged. Mr. President, no frank discussion on Libya can take place if we ignore the fact that the international legality of the country is being violated by providing weapons, military means, mercenaries, ammunition, by concluding illegal agreements in violation of the international law, including the law of the sea and the sovereign rights of third parties, by concluding agreements which further complicate the Libyan conflict, posing at the same time a risk to the peace and stability of the wider region. We would like to stress in the strongest possible terms that this is no way forward. As a neighboring country with a long-standing interest in the stability, peace and prosperity of Libya, we also bear the consequences of this crisis. I was recently in Tobruk in my second in just a few months visit to Libya, during which I met with Speaker Saleh. We underlined to all our interlocutors the need for a political solution, and we stand ready to contribute to international efforts in order to observe the arms embargo and the ceasefire in Libya. This by working towards a viable political settlement of the conflict. Mr. President, at this critical juncture, we believe it is high time to exert every possible effort in promoting peace and stability for Libya. It is also time for those who use Libya as their proxy war battlefield to respect the commitments under the United Nations Security Council resolutions and the Berlin Conference. The time is also ripe for the Libyans to take ownership of this process in order to reach an inclusive negotiated solution that can offer a viable long-term way out of the conflict. It is therefore time for all of us to step up by actively and genuinely contributing to the efforts of the international community in bringing back peace, stability, and prosperity to Libya. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you so much, dear Heiko.
Thank you very much, Nikos. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Nasser Bourita, Minister of Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation, Moroccan Expatriates of the Kingdom of Morocco.
Thank you very much. I would like to commend Germany for this new opportunity to address the situation in Libya and to thank the Secretary-General for his report. Allow me to share with you the perspective of Morocco on this issue through three messages. My first message is a message of concern. The coronavirus didn't make the situation any better in Libya. The political, military, economic, and the humanitarian situation have worsened further in the country. In 1 year, more than 2,300 people have died, including 400 civilians. Libya has more than 400,000 internally displaced persons and 50,000 refugees and asylum seekers. At the economic level, the decline in the GDP growth is estimated at 60% in 2020, and the increase in the inflation rate is forecast at 22%. Security situation is alarming, with the presence of uncontrolled armed groups, militia, and terrorist actors. My second message is one of disappointment. There is indeed a consensus over the international community on the need to move forward and make the process in Libya. And we are gathering today to renew and reaffirm this consensus. But let us be realistic and pragmatic in addressing some basic questions. Will the proliferation of initiatives help resolving this conflict? Aren't they mutually exclusive? Would they not have the opposite effect? Libya should not be regarded as a lucrative diplomatic business, fond de commerce diplomatique. But as a matter of fact, Libya has become an arena of external competition, where some foreign powers are engaged in a proxy war, placing additional hardship on the Libyan brothers. Foreign intervention is not helping in any way the Libyan parties to raise above their narrow interests and to face the challenge of forging a better future for Libya. Of course, we need to be aware of the divergent objectives, different values, and asymmetrical power structures of the various actors. But let us most and foremost be bold and commit ourselves to the specific target of creating conditions for a genuine inter-Libyan discussions. My third message is a call for mobilization. There is a consensus within the international community on the need to move forward and make progress in Libya. We should be determined to translate our consensus into practical and concrete terms. The Kingdom of Morocco is deeply convinced that a sustainable solution to the Libyan crisis is a political solution, not a military one. A solution that must come from the Libyans themselves, not from outside. A solution that guarantees the unity, territorial integrity, and national sovereignty of Libya. And a solution that is preserved from foreign influences and agendas, including military interference. The political agreement signed in Skhirat, Morocco in December 2015 may not be the perfect deal, but no equal alternative is on the table. Its provision need to be adjusted and updated in light of developments in the ground. And it is for the Libyans to do that. Our responsibility is to encourage and help them. We consider the UN mission as an important instrument, but it can be further enhanced and restructured. Mr. Chairman, Libya is not only a neighbor to Morocco. It is a brotherly country with which we share common history, common bonds, and common interests, and the same destiny. Libya is not just a diplomatic issue. Our security, our stability is dependent on the situation in Libya. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Akhtar Saleh Damané, State Minister for Foreign Affairs, African Integration, International Cooperation, and the Diaspora of Chad. Sorry, Your Excellency, we can't hear you. Okay, now we can't see you and can't hear you, so I propose we come back to Chad later on, and now I would give the floor to the representative of the Sudan. So I can't see Sudan, I can't hear Sudan, but I can.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Please go on.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the technical fault. Mr. President, thank you very much. And I'm reading this statement on behalf of my foreign minister, my Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Sudan. I congratulate Germany on assuming the Security Council presidency for the month of July and for convening this timely debate on the situation in Libya. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you, Minister Heiko Maas, and Mr. Minister, the Sudanese people recognize and appreciate Your Excellency's visit to Khartoum as one of the first foreign ministers to Sudan after the success of its peaceful revolution. May I take this opportunity also, Mr. President, to convey once again my government's thanks to Germany for successfully organizing Sudan's partnership conference later in June. I'd like to also like to thank the Secretary-General, Mr. António Guterres, for the detailed briefing he delivered this morning. So, President, Sudan attaches great importance to the political and security situation in Libya. Not only that the two countries share borders with each other, but also because what happens in Libya would affect positively or negatively the national security and political stability of the Sudan. Therefore, we have been closely following the developments in the country, as well as the initiatives to narrow the differences among the different parties in Libya. We thus once again express our support to these initiatives. In this regard, Mr. President, it is our conviction that all Libya's neighboring states should be engaged in all international or regional arrangements seeking to stop the fighting in Libya and save our brothers there from the scourges of war, destruction, and unnecessary external interference. The neighboring states not only have vital interest in a peaceful Libya that live at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors, but also have a fundamental role to play in bringing that peace to the country. The President, Sudan remains fully firm in its position that no military solution will ever put an end to the conflict in Libya. The situation in Libya is political in nature and can only be solved through negotiations and dialogue between the parties to address the political differences through peaceful means. Let me take this opportunity, Mr. President, to point that while we are aware of some reports about the involvement of Sudanese individuals and non-state actors in the conflict in Libya, the Sudanese government categorically denies any participation of Sudanese troops in support of the belligerent parties in Libya. On the contrary, Sudan has repeatedly offered to form a joint military forces between Sudan and Libya to secure the borders from any illegal crossings, whether in the form of individual fighters, human traffickers, or organized crime groups. Just last week, the Sudanese armed forces detained 120 Sudanese nationals who were trying to illegally cross the borders into Libya, presumably to fight there or cross the Mediterranean to Europe. Mr. President, to conclude, Sudan remains supportive of the government of national accord in Libya. We also renew our support to Libya's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. We look forward to any engagement that realizes Libya's people's aspiration to security, reconciliation, and sustainable peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And now back to Chad. Let's try it again. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président du Conseil de sécurité. J'espère que cette fois-ci, vous m'entendez. Vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? D'accord, très bien. Monsieur le Président du Conseil de sécurité, Mesdames et Messieurs, les membres du Conseil de sécurité, distingués participants, le Tchad se félicite de la tenue de cette importante réunion ministérielle du Conseil de sécurité par vidéoconférence sur la situation en Libye et remercie l'Allemagne d'en avoir pris l'initiative. Le Tchad constate avec regret que les parties au conflit, appuyées par les puissances étrangères, s'affrontant par procuration sur le théâtre libyen, continuent de privilégier l'escalade de violence en violation des engagements pris dans le cadre de la conférence de Berlin du 19 janvier 2020. Face à cette dangereuse escalade militaire, aux conséquences régionales extrêmement graves, le Tchad appelle le Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies à prendre ses responsabilités pour faire respecter l'embargo sur les armes, mettre un terme aux ingérences extérieures, ainsi qu'au recours à des mercenaires et combattants étrangers. La poursuite des affrontements meurtriers sur fond de compétition des puissances étrangères et de l'emploi croissant de milices, de mercenaires et supplétifs venus de l'étranger ne font que renforcer la violence et détériorer la situation humanitaire. À cela, il faut ajouter le spectre de possibles crimes de guerre suite à la découverte des macabres charniers lors de reprises de villes par un camp ou par un autre. Le Tchad appelle toutes les parties prenantes libyennes à cesser immédiatement les hostilités et à s'engager dans des négociations d'un cessez-le-feu durable en vue d'un processus de dialogue inclusif devant conduire à une véritable réconciliation nationale dans l'intérêt supérieur du peuple libyen. Le Tchad est convaincu que la situation de la crise libyenne est politique et non militaire. Et cette solution doit être le résultat d'une entente entre les Libyens eux-mêmes. Le rôle de la communauté internationale est de les aider à y parvenir. Dans cette perspective, le Tchad souligne l'urgence d'une forte mobilisation des Nations Unies, de concert avec l'Union africaine et les pays voisins de la Libye, en vue de faire renouer le fil du dialogue entre tous les acteurs libyens sans exclusion aucune. Le règlement durable de la crise libyenne doit être inclusif et prendre en compte toutes les dimensions sociologiques, régionales et politiques de la société libyenne dans sa diversité. Pour ce faire, la meilleure plateforme pouvant permettre aux Libyens de se parler est le Forum inclusif du dialogue interlibyen dont l'organisation est confiée à l'Union africaine. Il est urgent de mettre d'accord les acteurs libyens sur une feuille de route largement consensuelle, mettant l'accent sur la réconciliation nationale, l'unité du pays et la restauration de l'autorité de l'État. Cette feuille de route doit également intégrer le désarmement et l'intégration des milices dans les institutions, l'intégration des milices dans les institutions de l'État ou dans la vie sociale, ainsi que le démantèlement des mercenaires et des groupes terroristes présents en Libye, ainsi que le retrait des combattants étrangers. Dans cette optique, le Tchad appelle toutes les parties prenantes libyennes à cesser immédiatement les hostilités et à s'engager dans les négociations d'un cessez-le-feu durable d'un processus de dialogue inclusif devant conduire à une véritable réconciliation nationale dans l'intérêt supérieur du peuple libyen. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Your Excellency, merci beaucoup. And now, last but not least, I give the floor to the representative of Libya. Your Excellency, sorry, we can't hear you. Please try again.
You hear me now?
Yes, now it works. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Minister Mas, and we welcome you today in joining this session. And also, I wish to congratulate Germany on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month. And I would like also to thank the Secretary-General for his briefing and the efforts of UNSMIL, led by Stephanie Williams, during these difficult times. I also want to deliver the speech on behalf of my Foreign Minister, Mohamed Siada, and I thank you for accepting our request to speak last, because we needed to listen and reflect to all these statements, which topped up to 32. Although we wanted to speak in Arabic, so I hope the Secretariat will fix this issue in the future in terms of translation. Mr. President, I take this opportunity to thank Germany and Ms. Angela Merkel for her efforts to reach international consensus and find a peaceful solution to the Libyan crisis. Today's meeting comes in an important time and in the presence of all these countries. It's a good chance to officially announce the failure of the adventure led by the aggressor, which he named jihad and the open conquest. I hereby announce today the fulfillment of our previous promise that the invader won't ever enter Tripoli, and he didn't. Thanks to our national army and our valiant armed forces, we announce the triumph of our operation Burkan al-Ghadab, which represents the victory of those who call for a civil and democratic state over the defeated scheme of state militarization. The resilience of Tripoli is a symbol of resilience against all plots of counter-revolutions and those who support them, not only in Libya, but on behalf of the entire region. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have previously stated in my early briefings, since 2011, my country has witnessed attempts by several states to extend their control over Libya, plunder its wealth, and tear its national and social fabric. Those states benefited from the events to create chaos and settle scores on our land. They took advantage of opportunists to achieve their agendas by suppressing the dream of a democratic transformation that the Libyans aspire to. Today, while listening to your briefings, Libyans are wondering, now you are talking about a political settlement and dialogue? Where were you more than a year ago when bombs were falling on innocent people and thousands of civilians, including children and women, were killed? Where were you when our civilian infrastructure was being bombed and hundreds of thousands were displaced? All these violations and war crimes occurred before your eyes. What did you do to stop them? And what have you gained from this bloody adventure launched by a rebel obsessed with power? Today, we are hearing calls for reasoning, wisdom, and dialogue. But by whom? By states that were and are still supporting the aggressor secretly and publicly. Calls for reasoning by states that deliberately disrupted the path of UN dialogues and the efforts of its former envoy, Ghassan Salama, who spoke in an interview a few days ago with CHD, and after being freed from the restrictions of UN bureaucracy, he expressed his anger and hypocrisy of some states. And I quote, "I was stabbed in the back by the majority of the members of the UN Security Council. I no longer had any role the day Haftar launched his attack on Tripoli, he got the support of most of them, while we were being criticized in Libya because we didn't stop him. Some major states not only supported Haftar, but they colluded deliberately against holding the national conference in Ghadams, end of quote. Then we hear states talking about no military solution here. If these are the words of the 6th UN envoy to Libya, how can we trust the intention of international community for reaching a peaceful solution and its credibility in the future? Libyans and the people of the world are tired of double standards. Unfortunately, the UN, which is 75 years old, has become strained and helpless, and the Security Council has become just an arena for arguments and empty statements. Therefore, a real and fundamental reform is inevitable. What are the evidence of crimes and violations by the aggressor and his supporters are you waiting for? All of which are documented in your reports and in the reports of the ICC. What about the mass graves recently revealed in the city of Tarhuna? Bodies of children, women, and youth, where up to 220 victims were found so far among those who were buried alive. What about the explosive and mines planted in the homes of citizens south of Tripoli, resulting as of today in the death of 80 innocent victims with the testimony of the United Nations mission? This was nothing but a cowardly act carried out by the militias of Haftar and his mercenaries, reminding us of the atrocities of ISIS terrorists in Sirte. And yet, some still consider this war criminal a partner for peace. In this regard, we thank ICC and Human Rights Council for accepting our request to investigate these violations, and hopefully they will be bringing the perpetrators to justice. What other evidence and proof are you waiting for to see that there is an international formation of mercenaries, whether those affiliated with the Russian Wagner Group or Sudanese, Chadians, Syrians, who are working under the command of the war criminal and his agents? Libyans and all the world saw them fleeing their positions located south of Tripoli on TV. We all saw how the mercenaries were hurriedly evacuated from Beni Walid airport after realizing that their defeat was inevitable. Today, we find them in broad daylight, stationed in the east and hijacking oil fields and ports. Therefore, we reiterate our request to the states concerned to withdraw their citizens and hold them accountable, and those who finance them, otherwise they are complicit in these violations and crimes, and the Security Council should impose immediate sanctions on these entities and individuals. In this regard, I would like to thank the Sudanese government for arresting more than 120 mercenaries a few days ago who were trying to infiltrate the borders to fight in Libya. And I tell my Russian colleague that when we talk about Wagner Group, we're not talking for sure about official soldiers. We're talking about a group of mercenaries that is led by this group. You might not have official soldiers, but there are citizens, and some of them are Russian citizens. So we ask your government, as other governments, to do the necessary steps in order to take them out of my country. Ladies and gentlemen, Libyans are wondering about the reasons behind the presence of some states in international forums that have no ties to Libya. For instance, why was UAE involved in discussing the future of Libya? Is it a neighboring country? A Mediterranean country? Is it a member of the Security Council? If UAE isn't interfering in our affairs as it claims, why do they rush to take a seat in every meeting? Why do they welcome war criminals and give them podium to hold press conferences, to incite war and provide them with funding and weapons? Why were Emirati officers recently featured in video recordings training Haftar militias on Russian Pantsir missile systems? Does Libya pose a threat to UAE national security? UAE is undoubtedly involved in supporting the unsuccessful coup attempt in Libya and in threatening international peace and security in several parts of the world, as indicated in various UN reports, and has not been able to date to defend itself to what was stated against them. And for all these reasons, we no longer accept its engagement in our political dialogues. And it's strange to hear the foreign minister claiming peace and stability and not able to speak about the loads of weapons that he's sending to the other party. In this regard, we call upon the United Nations also, or in this context, in this regard, we call upon the United Nations and international community to limit any future Libyan talks to concerned member states from neighboring countries, Mediterranean countries, and Security Council. If not, then we will demand adding other important countries to assure proper balance while discussing the Libyan matter. In the same context, we are astonished to hear some countries saying today that they are against foreign interference and call for preservation of sovereignty of Libya and its territories, and present unrealistic and unilateral political initiatives in absence of relevant players, as we have been hearing today regarding the so-called Cairo Declaration. Meanwhile, we see statements that threats of direct intervention, as announced by the Egyptian government, drawing red lines inside our lands, as stated by its president, and threatening to arm the youth of our tribes to fight their brothers inside Libya under the excuse of its national security. We totally condemn and reject these threats and remind everyone that their support to Haftar is what threatened international peace and security and regional stability and brought us to where we are today. We will face any aggression with firmness and strength, and we assure that Egypt's national security falls within Libya's national security. But Libya can't be reduced to a region on any country's border. We didn't interfere in others' political affairs, as it's their choice, but no one can impose their system on us. Moreover, Libya is not being governed by a tribal group as being falsely promoted. Rather, our tribes are our cultural and social foundation that we value and cherish, and any attempts to divide us will not succeed. And I remind the Foreign Minister of Egypt that we are the ones who defeated ISIS in Sirte, and we took revenge to those 21 who were killed from Egyptian citizens. We are the one who did so. It wasn't Haftar's forces. That being said, leads to Haftar's militia and mercenaries' control over several oil fields and installations, the latest of which we witnessed the invasion of Wagner mercenaries in Asharara field, in an act to engage the South in another cycle of chaos, to add more suffering to the people of the South, who already have been through difficult times and lived decades of crisis and marginalization. The recent closure of oil ports has caused a financial loss estimated by the National Oil Company of more than $6.5 billion. And some foreign actors are taking advantage of this issue as a leverage to achieve their objectives and other international affairs, and increase their shares in global markets. In this regard, we emphasize that oil is the wealth of all Libyans, and we will liberate all facilities from militias and mercenaries. And we will use all possible means to resume production. In this regard, my government reserves the right to prosecute all those who incited the blockade of oil fields and prevented the export of oil. What is being promoted is nothing but flimsy justifications when referring to the issue of equal distribution of wealth, which is merely an argument for controlling the state resources, and that will never happen. We affirm that solving this problem fundamentally and ensuring justice for all regions of Libya will only come through ending the transitional periods and engaging on a constitution in which the Libyans define the state governing and economic systems. As noted above, I would like to emphasize on the following. First, choosing our coalition, signing security and military or other agreements with any country is a sovereign and legitimate right and isn't called foreign intervention. Intervention and violation of sovereignty are the practices of some states in terms of transgressing the legitimate government and supporting coups and outlaws with money, arms, and providing political support. And if our agreements are illegal, then all of our agreements signed with your countries, whether security, economic, or oil-related, are also legal. Ladies and gentlemen, the definition of intervention when countries interfere in local affairs against the will of the state. But when we signed as a legitimate government,
you are the only
any agreement is totally our own responsibility. And I respond to the Foreign Minister of Greece when he's talking about respecting UN resolutions. I remind him that he himself didn't respect it by engaging and meeting with the parallel government in the East. That's a violation of the UN resolutions. Second, the Security Council resolutions on the situation in Libya calls on all states to support the government of national accord to extend its control over the entire Libyan territory, and imposing the arms embargo should be on those outside legitimacy, instead of undermining the government and support the coup against it, as in Resolution 2259. Third, we are all aware of the problem of the spread of weapons, militias, and armed groups that are present in most cities and regions. However, the solution wasn't and shouldn't have been by waging wars and fighting. The only solution is through putting an end to the division of the country, reaching stability, and embracing our youth and activating DDR and SSR programs. The solution further includes improving the economic and social situation. Our youth have been victims of conflict and the deterioration of this situation over years, so they should not be all put in one basket. Fourth, we believe in the significance of reaching a comprehensive political solution among all Libyans, a solution that leads to building constitutional institutions so as to move the country out of its current crisis. However, this shall not involve parties that have committed violations and crimes to seize power and militarize the state. Fifth, any political initiatives presented must be national-owned and under the auspices of the United Nations and in coordination with the African Union. We reject any unilateral initiatives that are not inclusive of all Libyan parties, custom-made for some individuals, and presented by impartial states that support rebels. Sixth, we request the presidency of the Security Council to hold a special and urgent hearing this month for the Sanctions Committee, with the presence of all states mentioned in the reports of the panel of experts on Libya and accused of violating the arms embargo in support to the aggression. I do not think that this request is difficult to fulfill and is equally important as today's meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, my government reaffirms its strategic choice to adopt peaceful solutions to the Libyan crisis to exclude foreign interference. It further reaffirms the participation of parties that believe in peace and work towards achieving it, which is in fact the approach adopted by the Libyan state on many occasions. We also call on the United Nations to deal with the issue of political dialogue between Libyans from now on in a different manner, since the circumstances have changed. There is no room to talk again about the outcomes of Paris, Palermo, Abu Dhabi, or others. You must expand the base of the political dialogue stemming from the Libyan political agreement to be more inclusive and include real actors, political parties, and figures from all regions. The only solution to the Libyan crisis and to end the fighting over legitimacy is to return to the Libyan people and end the useless transitional periods. The previous mistakes should not be repeated, and the custom-made solutions to suit certain individuals, groups, or countries must come to an end. The only solution must come through the constitution that was deliberately ignored in all political initiatives, despite the work of the National Elected Constitution Drafting Committee. We must organize legislative and presidential elections as soon as possible, as this will give the opportunity for the aspiring individuals to participate in the elections and prove their popularity and true legitimacy. This is the only solution for our self-determination rather than having our destiny being determined by others. This summarizes the political vision of the government of national accord for those who ask, and it is supposed to be the title of our Libyan dialogue. In conclusion, we call on all Libyans to reunite and side with the nation, and to work together to waste the opportunity for those who seek to divide us. The outcome of the aggressors' adventure was nothing but more killings and destruction for the benefit of other states and individuals. Our beloved people in the East, you have been throughout history a beacon of scholars, elites, intellectuals, and revolutionaries of Libya. We never recall in any time in the past where you sent your men under any pretext to kill and displace your Libyan brothers and sisters. You have always been the voice of truth and the wisdom of the voice of truth, and the independence of Libya and its unity were because of the wisdom of your leaders at that time. We all must remember our founding fathers from all over the country, east, west, north, and south, who contributed with their patriotism in establishing the state and uniting the nation, rather than destroying and dividing it. It is us who could stop all foreign interference, ambitions, and conspiracies, whatever and from whoever they are. So let's work together to build our future with our free will. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the statement, and I had to excuse the Minister for Foreign Affairs because his time constraints and Libyan representative was fairly long. The representative of UAE and Egypt have asked for the floor. We're ready to grant this, but ask for very short intervention. First, the ambassador of the UAE has the floor. You have to unmute you. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you, yes. Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador Huysgen, for giving me the floor, and thank you for allowing this right of reply. I will make it brief, despite the Libyan representative being fairly long in his accusations to, I think, almost every constructive player in the international community. We regret that the constructive nature of this meeting under your leadership has been, an attempt has been made to undermine it by the representative of Libya. As my minister, Dr. Gargash, outlined earlier in his statement, the UAE has consistently supported a comprehensive and lasting political solution to the Libyan crisis, and its efforts have always been in accordance with the principles of international law, the Charter of the UN, and Security Council resolutions. And we continue to support the tireless efforts of the United Nations to work with the parties to reach a ceasefire and resume a political process. I feel I must state this again here for the record because of the accusations that were thrown at my country. Yes, the solution must come from the Libyan people, but that includes all of the Libyan people, not a select few. And progress in Libya will necessarily involve difficult compromise by all parties in Libya, and a recognition that any hopes for a military victory are an illusion. We reaffirm our commitment to Libya and the outcomes of the Berlin conference, and we urge others to make the same commitment here today because, and I was asked why my country has an interest at being at this table, but because ensuring Libya's long-term peace and stability is a core interest for peace and security in the international community at large. And I thank you, Ambassador Huysgen.
I thank the Ambassador and representative of the United Arab Emirates for her statement, and I pass the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear
we
me?
can hear you, but please speak up.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. We are hoping that the permanent representative of Libya to take the same path and spirit of all speakers today, that we're tending to push for dialogue, not confrontation, for de-escalation, not escalation. We reject all the false accusations that he addressed concerning Egypt in this regard, and also I wish to remind him of the efforts Egypt made for years to really unify and to close the gap among Libyans, including the unification of the army, the parliament, and to do the best in order to bring back stability in this country. Mr. President, also we hope that the permanent representative of Libya to go back to the flow of statements that we all can read in Libya, condemning the acts of the officials in Tripoli, those who brought into the country what they call it, the Libyan they call it, the occupation, by bringing the foreign countries, the regional foreign countries that are now really deepening more the crisis and took it to another level. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his intervention. I see there is nobody else who has asked for the floor. Minister Maas had intended to say a few final words in his national capacity, and he had to leave, as I said before, and therefore allow me to read the statement that he had planned to read to you personally, again in his national capacity. Colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for participating in this important and lively discussion today. The Minister says, I am taking away the following central points from today's meeting. All participants expressed their concern about the continued conflict in Libya and its humanitarian impact. Suffering in Libya is further aggravated by the spread of COVID-19. And in this context, I would like to recall that 1 week ago, the Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire has been endorsed by this Council. Libya proves the importance of this call every single day. Therefore, we urge the conflict parties to bring the ceasefire negotiations of the 5+5 Joint Military Committee to a successful conclusion without preconditions and without further delay. There is strong support for a demilitarized solution for Sirte and Yufra among us. Members of this Council have asked the Secretary-General to make suggestions about which role UNSMIL could play in this regard. We all appreciate the tireless efforts of UNSMIL in support of a political solution for Libya, as well as the important roles that the African Union, the League of Arab States, and the European Union play in Libya's stabilization. Everybody underlined his and her support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Libya. We all reiterate our support for the Secretary-General's call to strictly observe the arms embargo and to refrain from interfering militarily in this conflict. Regarding the oil export blockade, participants called on the conflict parties to reach an agreement without further delay that ensures the resumption of oil production and an equitable distribution of revenue. I understand that such a solution is within reach. We sincerely hope that these UN-led negotiations will produce a positive result within the next days. The Minister suggests that you all participants in today's meeting communicate about today's meeting along these lines. I end the quote from Minister Maas that he, the declaration that he wanted to express in his national capacity. I take on again my hat as President of the Council. Again, I don't see that anybody asked for the floor. I see our colleague from the Russian Federation wants to ask the floor. Yes, Russia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. President. Hope everyone understands right that that was the statement by German foreign minister, and it was not an agreed position of entire council. And well, therefore, of course, we take note of your national position and your own perception of the results of the current meeting. But again, it was not something that was discussed between ourselves or our experts and or agreed. Thank you so much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. As a president, I would like to point out that I think at least at 3 occasions in this statement, I pointed out that this was the national statement that I read in the name of the German foreign minister. This is what I'm saying as a president of the Security Council, and in my capacity of the president of the Security Council, I now close the meeting, and I thank everybody for the participation. Thank you.